Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Urban Water Management Plans 201 webinar. This is hosted by Water Now Alliance and Madaus Water Management. My name is Danielle McPherson, Senior Water Resources Specialist at the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. I'll be moderating today's event, and I'll kick us off with some logistical reminders before we get started. As a note, we are recording this webinar, including the breakouts, and the recording will be shared after the event. Great. So we would like today's event to be interactive. So there's a couple of reminders about how to participate, although I'm sure you're all quite familiar with Zoom at this point. To ask our speakers a question, use the chat box shown here. And then if you could start your question off with question 4 and then insert the speaker's name that you'd like to answer the question, that would be really helpful for us. If it's a general question, that's fine too. We will be monitoring these throughout the webinar. General comments can be submitted in the chat box. If you're having any tech issues, we have Jesse with Water Now on point to help. Please use that chat box to message him directly for assistance. We'll be using the polling feature throughout the webinar. You can see that little arrow pointing to it now. During the registration process, you are asked to select one of 4 breakout sessions, which will take place in the last 30 minutes of the webinar. You'll be automatically sent to your registered breakout at that time. If you are calling in or if you have joined on a web browser rather than logging in on the Zoom app, you will default to breakout room number 2. That one is conservation, water loss, water storage, and revenue impacts. Lots of topics for them to cover. All right, so we have a large cohort of speakers for you today. We have Sabrina Cook with DWR, Lisa and Michelle Madaus with Madaus Water Management. We have Kendra Olmos with the UC Davis Center for Water and Energy Efficiency. We have Sarah Triola with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I've already introduced myself, and last but not least, we have Caroline Cook with Water Now Alliance. Each of these numbers next to their pictures are which breakout room they will be hosting, which you will see here on the next slide for the agenda. Okay, great. So briefly to go over the agenda today, I'm going to start us off with a very brief review of what we covered in the last webinar, which was Urban Water Management Plans 101. Next, Sabrina will share tools that DWR has provided to support updates to your 2020 plans. Following Sabrina, Michelle will walk through the planning process. Lisa will cover key sections and data tables, excuse me. Caroline will wrap up the group presentation by detailing steps for adopting your 2020 plans. After the main presentation, we'll have a short break, and you will be redirected at the end of that break to the breakout room that you selected on your registration. As a reminder, if you called in or if you're on a web browser, you'll default to breakout room number 2 listed here. If you would like to be placed in a different breakout room, please message or use the chat function to message Jesse directly. All right, so we can get started. Really quick recap of the 101. We covered a high-level overview of the Urban Water Management Plan Act and key changes over the last decade. We discussed how to leverage experience from 2015. That was our sort of tales from the trenches from individuals that had developed those plans. We highlighted key changes to look out for, many of which have been clarified now that the draft guidebook has been released. We gave you actionable next steps that hopefully you all took and are well on your way with your 2020 plans and ready to meet the deadline of July 1, 2021. Finally, we provided a list of resources and web links to help you get started. A link to the recording of that webinar should be shared. Yep, it's been shared in the chat box. Thank you, Jesse. If you missed that webinar or you just can't get enough of this topic, you can click on it and watch that later. All right, since that webinar, we have received the draft guidebook. We had public comment period open and closed, And we expect DWR to release the guidebook in November, the final guidebook, excuse me. Great, so I want to start with an audience poll here. I'm gonna launch this unless you do, Jesse. Oh, I guess Jesse launched it for me. Thank you. So we want to know who we have in the room today. So if you could share with us which of these you identify with. And we'll leave this open until we have folks are rolling in with their responses. Thank you everyone for participating. This is really great. See how high we can get. All right, a couple more seconds here for everyone to participate. Okay, I think that we can call it. Great. Thank you, Jesse. You are sharing, he's taking care of everything. This is fantastic. Great, so a large majority of you guys are utility staff, some management, a couple consultants, and a few board of directors. That's great. We can move on to the next poll, where we wanted to see where you guys are from. So if you could select which area best fits you. Far south is like south of LA, so San Diego area. Wow, 87% have participated, and before 30 seconds, we have an active, engaged group today. This is great. Jesse, I'll let you decide when it's best to wrap it up. Okay, so most people from the Bay Area, where we are, a lot of people from Southern California. That makes a lot of sense too. Great, and then we have one last poll. And I believe that one is if you were able to join us on the 101 webinar, yes. So curious how many people are repeat offenders here and how many are new. Great, so most people are new, that's great. Welcome, we're excited to have you. Now, the last, hold on. There we go. Okay, before I hand it over to Sabrina, I just want to cover the importance and benefits of these programs. I want to remind folks that these plans are really important, and what purpose they serve and how they can be used to support your agency's planning and capital work. This should be the go-to document for your agency's water story, and it should be the first piece of information that's given to incoming board and council members, management, and staff. Each agency bears a huge social responsibility to maintain a reliable supply of water to meet demands. This document provides the agency the opportunity to explain to the public how they are meeting that challenge. The social responsibility is more prominent now than ever. We have weathered several black swan sort of events like prolonged droughts and recessions, but right now we're really living through unprecedented times, making this communication tool all the more important. The plans are also important for several planning purposes, including integrated planning through the UWMPs. They help inform capital improvement programs and master planning, as well as financial planning like rate studies. The assessments performed illuminate the agency's local and regional water supply reliability and water balance. As many of you are aware, they are a prerequisite for state grants and loans. And finally, these are public-facing documents that tell your agency's water story, and they are often used by outside entities like contractors, consultants, and other organizations to provide visibility into the agency's planning process. So just really want to again stress the importance of developing well-rounded plans. One last audience poll here. We would like to get a sense of how engaged you have been so far. So we are curious if you have read the draft guidebook, if you participated in the DWR workshop in September, or if you maybe don't even know where to find the guidebook. And I believe this one you should be able to select more than one, hopefully. So it looks like folks, I mean, 50, about half, more than half have read the guidebook, and folks attended the September 16th webinar that DWR held. That's fantastic. Well, that is all I have, so I'm going to pass it off to Sabrina now. I will relinquish control of the PowerPoint.
And I think I have control now. Thank you, Danielle, and welcome to everybody. Glad you could all make it. I know this is a hot topic these days for many people. Okay, there we go. So, you know, this applies to about 450 water suppliers in the state of California. The number's a little bit variable depending on situations, and they have to do this planning every 5 years, right? DWR, we prepare a guidebook and some tools to help the suppliers. The use of the guidebook is completely voluntary. People can go through and wade through the torturous water code on their own, but it can be very difficult, especially with the changes that have happened. There have been some small changes that have kind of material effects, and there have been big changes that are pretty obvious. So we prepare the guidebook to try and help people navigate this whole process and figure out what data to submit to, you know, to be compliant. So what we've tried to do is keep the structure as same as the 2015 guidebook. There are things we cannot do. Some of the style, some of the really cool stuff that we had in there, we can't replicate because we have to make this document web accessible for ADA compliance purposes, and that's like a big heavy lift. But we tried to do it as consistent with the 2015 as possible. That meant retrofitting some things. What we did also try to do is add in the beginning of each chapter some information about how important things were, the focus that they could, suppliers could, you know, look at, what the focus of that section was, how they could enhance for better planning, as well as clearly identify what the new requirements are compared to what was 2015. We also tried to, in each section, identify what was applicable to what types of suppliers, because there are some things that are only applicable to wholesale suppliers, some that are only applicable to retail, some that are applicable to everybody. So we tried to put little headers in our section. We used to have those nice little color bars with these little circles, which is the thing we can't do with compliance issues. So we still tried to do that. And we tried to be clear about what was recommended but not required by calling out, you know, recommendations either in text saying we recommend something, or a type of calculation that is by giving it its own little section saying recommended. So suppliers can choose to do the recommended or not, but if they don't do it, it's not, they don't, they're still compliant. We had a couple of stakeholder meetings where we went over what we were doing, some of the drafts. We had a working group that we sent the preliminary draft to get comments on and made edits to for the draft that we presented in September. We had over 450 attendees with the comments that we got from that particular situation, and then we got about 20 plus, 23, 25 individual comment letters and emails for over 350 comments. And the thank you is there is because we really appreciate the active involvement of stakeholders in commenting on these, so that, I mean, they caught a lot of typos for one thing, and it only helps us make it more clear, because the purpose of the guidebook is to help the suppliers. And if it doesn't do that, then we might as well have not made you a guidebook. So draft revision, we're still in progress. 350 comments, guys. it's taken a bit to wade through. That said, from just looking at the overall thing, there are no material changes. So if you use the draft guidebook to, you know, start preparing your plan now, you're in good shape. There might be, you know, a few things that might need to be tweaked because maybe we had something wrong in a table, we need to tweak that, or we add more clarity about who did or did not apply to things. So there are some clarifications, but nothing really material. We definitely need to clarify the Appendix C, which is one of the new things about how you report data for demonstrating reduced compliance on the Delta, who it applies to, what you can and cannot do, and to keep in mind that DWR can only do our best estimate of what will guidance, because we are not the Delta Stewardship Council, who is the one who ultimately would use this information and make decisions, because the Delta Reliance is not part of the Urban Water Management Planning Act. And then make sure that we've gone through everything and that what's required is very clear, what's recommended and optional is very clear, and what tables are required versus, you know, what you should submit versus what you don't, you just use for your own purposes. So the plans are due July 1st, the adopted plans to DWR. I'm sorry, we cannot change that deadline because it is legislated. We do accept plans whenever they come in, and I know that it's really tough for suppliers this year to do their plans and get them in on time. As was for the 2015, we will have the WUI data portal open for people to upload their plans. It's one of the tools, and we have some resources available there too for suppliers to use. And this is the link for the guidebook if you are one of those people that don't know where it is. So there's two ways to get to WUI data. There's a public access portal, and then there's the restricted access portal. The public access one is this one, and anybody can go to that now. You don't have to be a registered user, and you can download what's up there. You can look and see what other people have done in the past on their plans, and you can look what the tables look like in the past in the plans and get the data. And you can also go to this resources button down at the bottom. Under the resources, we have drafts of all the submittal tables, and we'll post the final ones there. We have drafts of all the tools, like the drought risk assessment planning tool that you can use, but that's optional. We have the energy intensity tables that you can use, and we have the tables that you can use for reporting reliance on Delta water. So those are all available via the resources tool that you don't have to sign up an account for. Now, when people get into actually putting their plans, submitting them to DWR, we have a restricted site where there's an account, because we don't want someone just giving a plan saying that, hey, this is the plan for such and such a district, and here's all their data, when they don't belong to that district and they have no right to do that. So we restrict access to this for the uploading to make sure that only official people are going to be uploading data for particular entities. And once you get in there, you have a choice of the things that you can do. You have urban water management tools, and you have a population tool. This one has some other things. You've got the water loss audit for those of you who've been doing that. That's where the tool sits, and it's where we keep all those things. Now, the population tool, we're updating it to populate with the new data. We did this in 2015. It's a nice little thing. You can upload, there's some questions that you answer, like I think I have them further down below, but basically you upload your district boundaries. Underneath it is the census, the latest census data by block group, and it can cookie cutter that census data with your boundaries so you can come up with your district population. And that is one of the hard things for districts to do in many places, especially if they're small districts, is district boundaries don't follow census boundaries or other boundaries. So figuring out what your population is can be very difficult and very, very important, because this is a compliance year for the 20% reduction by 2020. And that's all done in gallons per person per day. And so if your per people aren't good, you're going to get a number that might not work very well. So we're also doing a boatload of other studies for standards and recommendations coming out of the 2018 legislation. We're looking at the indoor residential water use. That's already set in code, but we're looking to see how good it is and maybe recommend if it should be something different. We're going to come up with the outdoor residential, some commercial, institutional, industrial, and variances. These standards will inform, and the methods for calculating objectives. These standards and the methods will go into informing how a supplier calculates their urban water use objective. That will have to be done on an annual basis starting in 2023, 24, start looking at it, developing those objectives. And then in 2027, it actually becomes enforceable by the water board. So one of the things that, so there it is. So starting in 2024, good, and enforceable in 2027. So one of the things about that in those objectives is you're supposed to talk about the demand management measures that you've implemented or plan to implement in order to meet the water use objectives. So one of the things where you also talk about demand management measures in your urban water management plan. So this is a good point for a nexus between 2020, 2025 plans and the urban water use objectives to start bringing in that discussion about what demand management measures are you doing, are you implementing, so that when you get to that point where you have to have this water use objective, you think you're going to be on target. So it's good to be thinking about it now, and we certainly do encourage that. So going forward, we plan on having some workshops. In mid-November, we were just getting the schedule. We're going to give a workshop on how we've addressed the comments in the final and go over all the main changes, as well as, because it might take time before the final can actually be published, because it has to go through all sorts of review processes in DWR. So we're going to give a workshop, though, that tells people, even if it doesn't get on the web yet published. And then actually starting in November, December, we're trying to put together some training sessions for people on doing their plans. And then April, May, we want to have the WUI data portal open. Now, if people use the tables in our worksheet and things like that, it's simply a matter of uploading. You know, you've already had your plan adopted, you've got all your data figured out, and then it's just a matter of putting that up on the website. So even though it seems like maybe a tight, only a couple months before the deadline, it should be good enough. And in the meantime, we're addressing people's questions. When they're done, we'll be reviewing the plans for consistency with the water code. And then we're delving into that whole studies and recommendation realm. We have a stakeholder list that anybody's interested in keeping informed of the things that are going on. They can sign up our list by asking to be on the listserv at wui@water.ca.gov. And I think that's it.
Yep.
So next.
Great. Well, thank you, Sabrina. That was a really nice setup. So I'm going to be covering a section on how is the planning going to occur. So I've heard there's a guidebook. She gave an overview of some key elements of what's coming. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching it and ideas of way to approach the edits in your plan. Next slide. So the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan chapters, there are 10 sections, probably in your 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, and luckily in the 2020 plan, it's the same layout. So if you haven't read the guidebook yet, and it looked like half of you have not, one thing you could do is take a 2015 Urban Water Management Plan and look at section 1 from your last plan and then compare it to what you think you would like to do in 2020 and read the guidebook as you go. So luckily they are in the same layout. So if you look at chapter 4 from 2015, it should be similar to 2020, and then you could look at the differences and then make the modifications to your document. Lisa's going to go over the different tables in the sections, but just kind of warming you up a little bit. These are the 10 sections that you would cover. The first ones are more introduction. The 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is where you're really going to have a lot of tables. 9, we heard from Sabrina, mention a little bit about the objectives and talk about what you're doing. And then chapter 10, you have your adoption. Next slide, please. So a little bit on timelines. This was also in our Urban Water Management Plan 201 workshop, but basically we are hoping that you have your team together to make your plan. The guidebook was released this summer. We are heading to we had a workshop on September 16th. We are heading to some final guidebook notifications and workshops. There will be some in November, just mentioned by Sabrina, so watch out for those, such a heads up to you. And the guidebook will release somewhere December-ish timeframe, so watch for that. Moving into 2021, then you should be doing some of your noticing. You do need to tell your neighbors, and Caroline will be mentioning that in just a minute in her section about the notifications, but do recognize on this timeline that you do have notification requirements and you're going to have adoption meetings. So make sure you plan that into your timeline. They're a little bit different for each agency, of course, but maybe start looking at your 2021 calendar. When are those meetings, and start working backwards. Most agencies we've heard are not only putting their adoption as the last possible minute, but maybe doing one ahead in case there are comments and you need to make edits. Give yourself a little bit of time, and then if you need a second meeting, you can do so before it actually goes through. And then you also want time to get it to DWR, submit the information via the portal that Sabrina showed you, and make the deadline of July 1, 2020 to actually submit your plan. So keep that in mind. So next slide is I'm trying to ask a question of where are you guys at. So keep that in your mind of how is your team doing. So we have a poll about that to tell us how is the process going from your end. It should be a multiple choice question. So you can put multiple if you're working on chapters 1 through 3 at the same time. You're doing, you know, analysis. That's fine. We're just kind of curious where you guys are at, you know, in your process. And I agree with Danielle's comment earlier. You guys are really fast. That's lovely. So see, a lot of people are starting. That's good. I'm glad you're starting. So, and a lot of you, you know, kicked off. So that's good. I'm hearing a lot of people, you know, having their kickoffs. You should definitely be kicking off about now. So, all right. So half the group is starting. Well, again, they don't add up to 100% because there's multiple, or kicking off and starting data collection. Yeah, those top 3 are kind of usually go in tandem. That makes sense. And then another set of you are kind of moving into analysis and data. One thing you could do if you want to save a little bit of time is, in addition to your kickoff, you can do data collection and work on chapters 1 through 3. The chapters 1 through 3 are slightly simpler, more text ones. So as you're collecting the data, you could potentially consider looking at your service area description, for example, and doing those in parallel. That'll save you a little bit of time. But I'm glad you're all working on it, and it's helpful for us to know where you are, because Lisa's going to continue on and she's going to give us some great tables. So thank you for taking the poll. And next slide, we're going to turn it over to Lisa. We were going to have a brief group discussion on kind of where people are at, but I think the poll did a pretty good job. If anybody really wants to speak up and has any question about how to set up a team, you're welcome to do so. We also have the breakout set up for you to ask questions. The whole structure of this is we're going to have 30 minutes at the end for breakouts, but does anybody have a desire to ask anything at this time?
If you are dialing in and you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. Just
Great.
FYI.
Well, this will be a warm up. It's totally fine. We just gave an option. You don't have to speak now, but do think about your questions. Oh, here's one. When will your guidance come out for the annual supply and demand assessments? Ooh, that was a good one. That's probably for Sabrina. Sabrina, do you know when the guidance is going to come out for that?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
No problem.
I believe I was checking the schedule. They plan, I think, on having a workshop on the draft in December, I believe. I should double check my master schedule of all things going on, but at which point that would be their draft schedule. I'm checking my, yes, mid-December is when they plan on having the draft guidance out.
Perfect. Thank you, Sabrina. And we have one more for you. When will the DWR population tool be ready? I notice it's been down for a few months.
Yeah, we've been updating it with, we have to go through the vendor that takes care of the site, and we've been updating, we've had them updating for the new populations. we thought it was supposed to be done by now, but we have to double check with them to see what's going on, because when I last, when I made the little figure, I didn't see anything that indicated it was ready for 2020 plans yet. So we have to check with them and get back with you. So, for people that are really want to know about this and they don't want to be part of the listserv or something like that, you can always, send an email to UWMP help@water.ca.gov. That's the same one that's in the guidebook, that helpline, and just ask to be notified when that tool is available.
Great. And if you could type that in the chat, that might help for them too, if you don't mind.
Okay. Make sure I get it right.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I got one more. Can you clarify if water shortage contingency plans is for retailers only, or if wholesalers can do it as well? That's another one for you.
Yeah, I kind of, that's my fault, people. I'm really sorry. When I was going through that, and I realized that when I wrote that, I had made a mistake. It's for both. It's just that, so just like actually the urban water management plan, as well as the water shortage contingency plan, the pieces of the water shortage contingency plan that are not planning elements, that are not things like, well, what sort of authorities are you going to impose on your customers to make sure, that they have water usage restriction when the wholesalers don't have customers, like individual peoples, they can't do that. So the things that the wholesaler can't do, or that are considered planning elements of the water shortage contingency plan, that's what they don't do. But they do a water shortage contingency plan that lays out, what their supplies are going to be, how they're going to go about notifying things, et cetera, and all that other stuff associated with, tracking and watching and, figuring out what might be able to be done. But it's a little different because their customers are different.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina. I got one last one, and it's yours too. You're popular.
Well,
so one last one. Because legislation deadline cannot be changed, will those who file face any sort of penalty if they turn it in late?
So they will not face any penalties from DWR. They may not be eligible for a grant or loan, state grant, water grant or loan, until they are in compliance, and they could be subject to third-party litigation. But DWR doesn't do anything. We don't have the authority to. All we have the authority to do is the grant and loan eligibility, and then that's kind of up to the individual financing programs, how strict they are with some of those things.
Great. All right, well, we have caught up on the chat. Thank you for answering all those, Sabrina. So with that, we're caught up. We're going to move on to the next slide, and Lisa will be covering some of the tables in the Urban Water Management Plan.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, I'm next up, and maybe we can have you guess which one's the older sister or younger. We like to tease, but we've been doing urban water management plans for a long time, and we want to give you today some insights into completing your plan. And one is that we feel the path to success is really focusing kind of a bottom-up look, if you will, from the checklist and the tables. So we advocate that you build your story when you start looking over the DWR standard checklist. Now, it's a very long list, so you have to kind of, sure you have your morning coffee before you look at it, but it does cover everything that's in the state water code, so you can be assured of meeting all the requirements. And that's what DWR is going to be looking for. There's a column where you fill in the page numbers, actually, where you've answered these questions for the checklist. So we find it's very helpful to use that as kind of those tables that are needed to be provided, kind of as your baseline structure for getting your 2020 plan done. We actually use a review and outline. We even use the track change function where copying comments in or reminders on making sure that we've tagged all the requirements from the checklist in certain places to just keep ourselves organized. And we do a very careful QA/QC with fresh eyes using the checklist to make sure, as if you were, empathic with the DWR reviewer, that you've met, kind of the intent of what's said in there. And then the goal is that you have DWR accept your urban water management plan, and then you've crossed the line there. So I have a couple of key takeaways that I want to slide, important ideas or things that I want you to make sure that you take as key ideas. And one is that the layperson information is new, and it can be really graphical support and engaging. Clearly defining right up front if you're a wholesaler and retailer and being consistent across agencies is really important, as is connecting with your partners. Now, if you're not the wastewater provider or recycled water supplier, or you're participating in a regional conservation program, you're gonna have some partners that you need to reach out to and go ahead and ask for information from to complete your plan. That includes also review by your land use authority. And your plan will have review of supply sources and demands, both the historical and the current and the future look. So be prepared to talk about your supply sources and demand. That's the whole concept, is also to go over conservation supplies and how you're going to reduce demands. And in the end, you're going to put it all together and talk about your water supply reliability, including in times of drought. So that's, then there's an added connection to climate change considerations and an optional energy intensity. And watching for consistency is really important. There are a lot of tables. Tables populate forward. You'll use the demand tables into the further tables when you do a balance of supply and demand, for example. You want to check that everything follows through along with your footnotes and just information's tracking through. That's fresh eyes reviews is so critically important. You will get comments on that, public comment. So I'm going to walk through each of the chapters briefly with you, just so you have a key sense of what they're asking for DWRs and in your own story. This is your elevator speech, chapter 1. This is the new requirement to have a summary. Some people have asked, can we just have a layperson description at the start of each chapter of our plan? You can do that, but you would need to label it accordingly so that DWR understands that you kind of distributed it across your plan. But I actually advocate that you treat it like a pullout or a roll of key summary. There's the audience should be your general public, elected officials, and there's kind of that 8th grade reading level, a lot of infographics and images. I like to joke, I actually have an 8th grader, so he's for hire if you need him to check your layperson summary. But it really should be customers, if they're just going to read one short section to understand the reliability of your supply demands and your drought risk, that this would be the go-to for them. The plan preparation is just a section to talk about who participated, what outreach you undertook. There's a required notice. This is where you would put that information, that you held a public hearing and you refer to an ordinance in an appendix, and what comments you received and how they were addressed. It's a critical, vital section of the plan. Is usually not terribly long, perhaps longer or straightforward. And if you've had a long-term supply without a lot of changes, then chapter 3 might be just a really basic update. Or if you have a lot of new changes or exchanges or things or new agreements with your plan, then you would give chapter 3 an update, including any drought supplies or any type of supply that you're going to have a mention later in your supply source tables, and it's going to be by row. Then you want to make sure there's a description of the history, what right you have, how what the date is a pre-1914 right. You would bring this all up. If it's a contractual right, if it's a shortage, you would just bring up the details here. You talk about your infrastructure and the system characteristics. This happens to be the American River and the intake structure that serves my own home. So photos and visuals, great throughout this part of the plan. The customer water use is a section where you quantify demands and how water use is used in the system in your service area. There are 14 categories that are listed and kind of grouped, single family and multifamily and whatnot. If you don't have clear customer classification systems, you'll need to think about how to align this or how you did it in 2015 for consistency, because they do ask for some historical data. You also need to include some unique uses like ag irrigation, saline intrusion, wetlands. If you're doing saltwater barriers, wetlands, sales, losses are all included here. And it's divided into potable and non-potable. This is also the chapter where you refer to your water system audit, and we'll be talking about that in breakout session 2. You should have had those due in October 1st if you report on a calendar year, or January 1st for fiscal year. These would be attached to your urban water management plan. There's also a requirement to look at low-income households and water use profile and your climate change considerations, so in chapter 4. Chapter 5 talks about target compliance. There's some tables. They're looking, this is the benchmarking from SBX 7-7 on your gallons per capita per day. And you're asked to complete some required tables. There'll be some comments probably on this one with the 2020 pandemic. I know there's been a lot of shifting water patterns. Plan to footnote those. It would be good if you collaborated with your wholesaler or neighboring retailers on comments for this section. Because somebody that's down might be up, and I know some of the bedroom communities are obviously higher. If you're above your target, you'd obviously want to comment on that and the reasons why. Water supply characterization is in chapter 6. Now this is a vital go-to chapter. This is where you talk about and all your demands. There are a lot of tables in this chapter, in fact the most tables, and in chapter 7. So anything that appears in a table needs a description. So, you know, you don't want to miss groundwater or some source that you're planning to tap in the future, but you don't talk about it during the system description or anywhere else in the supply sources. It's quantifiable for a number of the tables. You may have multiple planning scenarios for your agency. You can talk about those, but it is a single scenario that your primary scenario that you're going to put in for the table inputs. And in the footnotes, I would identify, like if you had an integrated water resource management plan, if you have a master plan, or just whatever, if you're pulling from another document that you've put together, then document which you have selected. So here's a quick view on a couple of tables for chapter 6. So this is the groundwater volume pumped, for example. If you haven't seen these or been in the guidebook, there's going to be quantifiable tables like this. Right up front, you say, do not pump groundwater. So that's your does not apply checkbox. If you do, then you give an estimates down below about the different historical pumping you've done. And you also would give, there's requested projections elsewhere on future look. And here's the notes. So you would document any comments you have about pumping. Wastewater collected, this is where you talk to your, if you're not a wastewater provider and it's not coming from perhaps another department, then you would be talking to an outside agency, and they are asking for a quantification in your service area. There's wastewater treatment and discharge within your service area, and there's also recycled water in your service area by type of uses to the extent that you can estimate it, and they want it in volumes with descriptions. So this is who's supplying it and how it's operating, and is there any supplemental, like if happens in times of drought that you have to put in raw water or maybe potable water to keep the system pressurized. All that information lands in these recycled water tables. And these are, there's a documentation about 2015 versus 2020. So this is where people, you know, make a forecast, and they're looking to, with their water balance, make sure their water balance works. And they'll, if you have the opportunity to use recycled water, you'd help with the water balance here. So they're also looking for projected future recycled water use. And it comes together with future supply projects. And this is all retail water supplies, actual and then projected. So table 6.9 is one of the most important tables you'll go to if you have any future growth in your service area, because you want to help quantify that and plan for it when you go to your water supply assessments in the future. So there is, I see a question just popped up about some of the tables. We'll be talking about those tables a lot more in breakout session 2. If you have any questions, that's where we're going to give detailed time and attention to these. And any of the portals, we have some screenshots that Sabrina's provided. A few of them are sneak peeks to the portals that are currently being developed. Chapter 7 is about the water balance. This is where you bring it together in terms of supplies and demand, and you need to show reliability of the supplies exceeds demands under normal conditions. If you don't make that criteria, then you're effectively saying you don't have enough water to develop in the future. So we advocate that you include an extra 5 years. So that's when you see the OPT, like optional column. It's a good idea to think about going out to 25 years. And if you, so that's SB 221 and 610 with water supply assessments, and those are connected to the CEQA process doing EIR for developments that are larger than 500 homes of equivalent demand. Here's a quick look at the tables for chapter 7, and I'm going to again just roll through these real quick and prepare to answer, come to session 2 if you want, or look at the recording. I saw a note pop up there too about that. So these are where our breakout sessions be recorded. This is the one where you roll in not only the average year, but the dry years, and do an estimate of the amount of supply that you expect to have by volume under different scenarios. So again, you'll be picking your primary scenario, what your normal years and supplies and demands look like. So there's that 2045 optional column. This is under drought conditions for a single dry year. These are all individual tables and multiple dry years. And then dry year, there's a new 5-year drought risk assessment table too for 2021 through 2025. For each year, you'll need to talk about water use and supplies and any surplus or shortfall, and then what you're expecting for supply or demand in your water shortage contingency plan. That's one of the new robust tables. And some people with groundwater like PFAS issues or others might think about, how you're going to have your treatment or your risk profile may change year on year. So that's where you would embed that story. The water shortage contingency plan has had the most updates to the water code. There's 9 new requirements. If you want to just zoom right in on those, you can focus on pages 8.4 and 8.5 in the guidebook. Have a detailed list of what those new requirements are. One of them is that there's now state-defined shortage levels. So you need to create a table basically next to your own drought stages that talks about how you're going to meet the state shortage levels, which are a 10% step, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way down to greater than 50. So there's 6 levels of the state shortage levels defined in the guidebook that you will need to align with. And you don't have to change your own stages that are based around your supply triggers, but you do need to show how you are aligned with the state when, like in the last drought, the governor calls for a certain level of cutback and a statewide shortage level, what that means to your own agency. There's also the requirement for a communication protocol and like having a water shortage committee, and I'm going to show you a little example of that here in a minute. This is the chapter where you talk about an annual water supply and demand assessment. This is an annual requirement that will go in every year submission. So that is basically, you can think of it like the stress test that the state board was asking for before. They want to approach and a basic understanding of how this, you're going to approach it going forward and how you would trigger this water supply contingency plan. There's a drought risk tool that's been developed by DWR. There is also the requirement to talk about adjustments to your plan. When you would circle update to your water shortage contingency plan, which is now required to be adopted before it's attached to your urban water management plan, or concurrently. They both can be adopted at the same time, but it must be adopted by your board and included with your urban water management plan submittals. And here's the quick example of a communications protocol. This is just a quick, your water shortage community responsibilities. and timing, right? When you're in normal conditions, then things happen slower. You might be monitoring the water supply conditions quarterly through your operations. Your outreach would talk about, you know, it's a dry year normal, or and we're watching and then sharing resources. For example, you have agreements to running through maybe a conjunctive use agreement or groundwater banking or something else. When there's increasing activity or impacts, then that's when you increase the activity of the committees. You're watching monthly or shorter. For example, NOAA's already puts out a November and a December and a January. And if we continue to be dry, then this, you know, would probably move into a monthly this winter. And then if we're really severe, kind of coming out of the winter months, then you would meet more on a weekly basis. Sometimes there's even daily actions of those of us that went through the last drought, right? And then you return back. So this is just a quick image for how this works. This is also an idea, we can talk about this in Breakout 2, session 2 if you want, but a sample organizational structure. This is kind of a good stacked graphic you can do where who's going to be on the water shortage committee. Sometimes you need federal or state agencies related to fisheries and communicating with them. You obviously, internally, you have your board of directors, your water shortage contingency team leader. You might be a wholesaler, or you only have an individual retailer or a group of retailers. Just who's going to meet with who needs to communicate with who. You would have a layout and a structure to talk about who's who in your network that applies in your water shortage contingency plan. That goes back to your communications protocol. And what you probably can identify with perhaps the most is the support staff, and who on the support team of the committee would need to be involved. And so this just shows scalably, like who at a wholesale level would be connected, or a retailer level would have the operations team, the legal team, the in-stream flows, you know, in the monitoring and the environmental quality, communications, finance, conservation, public outreach, they're all involved and included. So just talking about the fact that you would collaborate among your departments is important, or having an org chart and how it would work. Chapter 9 is about the demand management measures. There's a separate wholesaler list or retailer list that talks, so you need to provide a description for each demand management measure, and include other measures such as regional partnerships or incentives or rebates or direct install programs or financing, you know, rate structures, whatever, however your budget-based rates, however it is you're going to think you're going to achieve future and have achieved historical conservation should be talked about here. And Sabrina mentioned, and I'll add on that, you know, consider looking ahead to your future water use objectives. You know, what actions are you taking now to plan for lower demand in the future? And lastly, chapter 10 talks about how you got it adopted and puts in your submittal. So this is, you know, planning ahead. As I mentioned, you need a careful, fresh eyes review for consistency and collaboration with your wholesaler, information flowing in from the other water districts, like our wastewater provider. We just want to make sure that you have that time and that administrative draft to give it a very thorough look with that DWR checklist, and to make it publicly available. Consider a public review draft. It's not required. We advocate for it. And that you have a formal public hearing for adoption, including call for administrative edits in there, because we have found, you know, that sometimes there's a minor typo or something that you want to make an edit to, including the final adoption ordinances, which are often in draft in an appendix, or not inserted but in the separate staff reports. You would need to make an edit to the plan to do that. Your final submissions, including your shortage contingency plan along with the urban water management plan, are uploaded to the portal. And electronic tables are also included and need to be completed. And then we advocate you do that one last and final page number reference check in your DWR checklist and make sure everything is buttoned up. And with that, you will sunset your plan, and it can be available, your water story, for use by all your customers and management, elected officials. So we have really appreciated the opportunity to connect with you. We look forward to Breakout session 2, and Carolyn's going to talk about how to cross the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was an amazing run through of lots of chapters. So as Lisa mentioned, there are several steps to adopting and implementing and submitting your urban water management plan and your water shortage contingency plan. So to walk through those steps, we'll be looking at chapter 10 of the guidebook and a few different sections of the water code. But at the top here, I'll note that the adoption process is an important step because as the guidebook explains, on quoting, adopting the plan makes it part of the formal management of the supplier, which is often important for justifying investment decisions and potential rate restructuring over the near and long term. So an important thing to know. Oop, too far. So adopting the plan can be broken down into 5 steps, and we'll dig into some of these in a moment, but a quick overview here. You'll first, gather all of your 2020 data that my fellow presenters have gone over what that includes. But this is an important note here because what that data means can depend on how your agency defines year. For example, if you use calendar year, then it means all the way up until the end of December 2020. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at the timelines here going forward. So next, you'll issue various notices to cities and counties within the agency service area, as well as to the general public. You'll hold public hearings and adoption hearings, and you will want to coordinate those with certain Brown Act requirements for public meetings. But in the interest of time today, we're not going to be going into the details of that this afternoon. All right, so at least 60 days before the public adoption hearing, you're going to need to inform the cities and counties where you supply water that the urban water management plan is going to be reviewed and changes are going to be considered. So while the water code doesn't expressly require this part, DWR does recommend that in that notice you include how and where the draft urban water management plan can be viewed, the revision schedule that you're going to be following, and who to contact if there are any questions. And it might be also a good idea here to include other stakeholders on this notice, public agencies, your neighbor water agencies that Lisa and Michelle are talking about, to allow them that opportunity for early engagement in the process. And while the water code doesn't provide an explicit timeline, you will also have to send notice to those same cities and counties of the time and place for the adoption hearing that can either be included in that 60-day notice or in a separate follow-up to the cities and counties. So practically speaking, the way this happens is through a letter to the relevant stakeholders, and you'll want to make sure that you're documenting that distribution list so that you can include it as an appendix when you submit your final plan. So in addition to the 60-day notice to the cities and counties, at least 14 days before the adoption hearing, you're also required to publish notice of the time and place for the hearings on the urban water management plan and the water shortage contingency plan in a local newspaper of general circulation. And so that notice needs to be published once a week for 2 successive weeks with at least 5 days in between. So for example, if my agency's adoption hearing date is June 3rd, 2021, the first newspaper notice would be published on May 20th. The second would be on May 26th. And then I will have complied with the 14-day notice period, and my publications will be once a week for 2 successive weeks with 5 days in between. So I think it's fair to say that the underlying purposes of all of these notice requirements that I've just talked about is to foster engagement with the community across a diversity of social, cultural, and economic perspectives, which is what the Water Code requires. And as the DWR guidebook explains, a transparent and accessible urban water management plan process is important for good governance of water resources. So part of that accessibility is a new requirement for publishing notices in multiple languages if your agency serves a substantial number of non-English speaking customers. And so we'll also in Breakout 4 be talking about some other engagement strategies for bringing in your public and your stakeholders. So here I'd like to just pause quickly for one more poll. Thanks for bearing with us. We like to know what you all think. This is multiple choice as our earlier ones were, but it'd be good to hear from everyone what practices you're using or thinking about including in your adoption process. And you can, again, choose from among these options: direct notice to stakeholders outside of the cities and counties, draft on your website, public hearing in addition to the adoption hearing, written comment, access to data, or something else that we might not have included. Give a few moments here. So it looks like there's lots of good options. Posting the draft on the website looks like a popular choice. Makes a lot of sense. Accepting written comments. All right. We're about 50%. So draft on the website is the winner, with lots of other options, a close second and third. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's really helpful. So you've now completed your 60-day notice period and your notice to the general public, and you've engaged everyone in that process, and you're ready to adopt the final urban water management plan and water shortage contingency plan. So at the hearing, as everyone has mentioned, and you can have that public comment period at the same meeting on the same day as the adoption, though that wouldn't necessarily leave time for amendments in response to those public comments that are provided at that hearing. So just keep that in mind as you think about your process. And to flag another new requirement here following the 2018 updates to the planning requirements, as Lisa mentioned, the water shortage contingency plan does need to be adopted as a standalone plan that, you can do it at the same hearing, but as a separate agenda item so that there's a clear record that you've done that. You can document it to DWR. And so on that note, you'll need to document all of these proceedings as part of your submission to DWR as appendices to the final plans. So who do you and how do you submit it to once you have the final plans? So within 30 days of the adoption hearing, the plans go to DWR, the state library, and the cities and counties that received the original 60-day notice. So the DWR submissions are electronic, as Sabrina mentioned, and more on that in just a moment. And the submissions to the cities and counties can also be electronic as an email to that distribution list. But the submissions to the state library should be mailed to the address that's listed in the guidebook at page 10-10 on a CD or as a hard copy printout. So for DWR in particular, you'll fill out table 10-1 that I think we've seen a couple times already, and you'll check the boxes using the template that applies, either retail or wholesale, demonstrating that you've completed the 60-day notice and the notice of the hearing. Those get uploaded to the data portal that Sabrina mentioned, and that includes a template of table 10-1 for you to fill out through that process as your registered user on that portal. So after adoption and submission, DWR will review, as Lisa mentioned, for completeness using Appendix F that's in the guidebook. So good to look at that now, make sure you're meeting all the requirements. You'll also need to make the urban water management plan and water shortage contingency plans publicly available by August 1, going off of the July 1st submission date. And there is a requirement in the water code to send the drought risk assessment and reliability portions to the cities and counties that are within the service area. But as a practical matter, that should be met when you send them the final adopted plan. So from there, you'll implement the elements of your plan as on the schedule that you have in there, and you can amend it using the same public process that we've talked about as needed. And the water shortage contingency plan can be amended separately since it is a standalone document now. So putting this all together, this timeline, working backwards from that July 1 date, want to make sure everybody can meet the deadline and not have to worry about any penalties. You can see from this that getting started with your public review and notice process begins in March and April of next year, which is coming right up. So with that, that brings us to the end of our main presentations. We're going to take a 5-minute break here ahead of our breakout sessions. Let everyone stand up for a moment. And our moderators from the breakouts will be closing us out from there, so we won't reconvene as a group. But I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining us today. We hope it's been helpful. And I know the breakouts will, provide even more information for everyone. And for those that are not familiar with Water Now, we are a network of local water leaders that are working to advance sustainable, affordable, and climate resilient strategies for their communities. And if you are interested in joining, you can do that for free. There's no cost to join through Water Now's website that I think Jesse will put in the chat box for you right now. So feel free to check that out, and we'll see you all back in 5 minutes, about 3:15.
All right. Well, welcome to the Water Demand, Climate Change, and Energy Intensity breakout session. I am Michelle Mouse from Madaus Water Management. I will be speaking first. I have 7 slides. I don't have a lot, but our goal is to get some dialogue and discussion and questions answered, but we want to give you at least some materials. And then following me is Kendra Olmos from UC Davis Water Energy Efficiency Center, and she will be covering energy intensity. So with that, I am going to go ahead and get started. Oh, hold on. There we go. So this is just my email. If you do have any questions when you're done, go ahead and you can email me directly. And I'd be happy to address any questions. As we're going, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will kind of address them. I'm going to speak first, and then Kendra's going to speak, and then we're going to do all questions at the end. But you don't have to hold your question. You can type in the chat, and then we'll see if we can work through those. My picture on the right is that climate change is a little bit complex. So the change in the weather, the change in the sea level, from the ice pack, and the change in water availability and snowpack or lack of snowpack is really a little bit complex. There's basically 3 different topics we need to cover as it relates to the urban water management plan. They do recommend in Appendix I, if you have not been there yet, that there's 4 key areas that climate change will touch. First of all, Chapter 3, system description. Second of all, Chapter 4, your water use characteristics. Chapter 6 is your water supply characteristics. And then Chapter 7 is your water reliability evaluations. So all of those can definitely be incorporated into your climate for the urban water management plan. So if you've been to Appendix I, it is 29 pages long. It does not tell you exactly what you have to do for climate change. It's not prescriptive. It does say you need to incorporate it, but it doesn't tell you exactly how that has to occur. It's the first time that urban water management plans have required climate change. Therefore, they give you a little bit of flexibility to choose what you wanted to do to address this topic. There are a whole host of resources. I'm just going to cover one here that might help you. The 4th climate change assessment was done by the state of California. It was published in 2018, and it does give different regions. So if this is just new for your area or you haven't done a deep dive, you can check this out. Each of these regions has its own individual report. That's why I like it. The IPCC, or International Climate Change Committee, also releases reports, but those are on a global scale. These reports, luckily, are not only California, but region specific. So you can go obtain your copy and it might give you some ideas or thoughts about your individual region. So for here, for example, I have that Central Coast highlighted, but again, you could click on your appropriate region for the plan that you're working on. This gives a little bit of history. So whichever document that you're working on, I would definitely, or resource that you choose to use, get a little bit comfortable with the information, what was incorporated, who developed it, and when it was developed. So I am focusing on the 4th assessment. It was developed in 2018, and it kind of gives a little bit of information where it is. But I recommend this for any of the resources that you use to make sure that you know who developed the information, why was it developed, and what does it contain, because they're all a little bit different. And this one I have found to kind of be helpful, because I'm going to give on the next slide an example. So say I clicked on the San Francisco Bay Area. I did do that because I saw a lot of people registered were from the Bay Area. So we went ahead and I pulled that one. It does give some predicted temperatures. So if you're in Chapter 3 in your system description, or in Chapter 4 about kind of your water use and things like that, maybe look at those tables and think about the change in temperature you're going to expect. So the Bay Area's past was 1.7 degrees Fahrenheit from 1950 to 2005. They call it early 21st century is 2006 to 2039. That was 1 to 2 degrees. And I'm saying approximately because they have 2 different scenarios in there. So you can look at the 2 different runs and 2 models and see the 2 different extremes they have. And then mid 21st century was 2040 to 2069. The urban water management plans, as you know, end kind of in 2045. So you can have a little bit of early and mid in your document. But I definitely recommend taking a look, seeing what's in there. They also talk about the change to your area in addition to temperature. But I like that it actually had tables that were information. Okay, so the information is there, but the guidebook was recommending going a little bit further into actually doing water demands, including climate change. So there's a little bit of a leap between doing temperature and then how it might impact water demand. When you look at climate change, there's 3 main topics that you might want to think about. Water supply gets a lot of discussion. That's the change in snowpack, the change in rainfall, the change in intensity. There's a ton of documents, a ton of information on that. There's not as much information out there about how does it impact the water demand, how much water is going to be used. If you increase your temperature, you can think on the other side that the demand may be impacted. It's going to be warmer. The plants are going to need more water. Your ET is going to go up. The evening temperatures might not decline as much. So there will be an impact on the demand. So I can't explain in like 3 minutes how to go about doing that, but I can offer you a document that did use this resource It's posted here, take a look. I talk about chapter 3, how do you incorporate it into the demands? And then we did a regression analysis and we wrote out the methodology, put the equations in there. They're there for you to use. This is a public document. I put those sources there if it's helpful, and or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's the best I can do at the time I have, but they definitely have requested to incorporate climate, supply, and on the demand side. And last but not least, the third topic to consider is your infrastructure. So in Appendix I, the 29-page appendix, there is a bunch of different topics. They're kind of along the top here is topics. So there's a section on sea level rise, saltwater, groundwater, flooding, fires. So depending on where you're located in California, we have a really large state, which is quite lovely, but we have a lot of different regions. So obviously we have the coast, we have the Central Valley, we have the mountains. So depending on where you're located, different one of these may impact you different ways, right? So, but one thing we were thinking is potentially you could develop a table. This one, thank you very much, was provided by Marty Laporte from Managed Water Consulting. She developed this and then worked with UWR to get it reviewed. Again, it's not prescriptive. There are no tables in the climate change section. However, they want you to discuss this. So one possible way would be to develop a table that gives you all of this information. So again, consider these one at a time, but not only is it going to happen, how is it going to impact your infrastructure? So if the sea level rises, is that going to impact your plants? If you have flooding, will that impact your facilities? If the water quality changes, can you actually process it? When the water gets warmer, when it gets more turbid, can your processing handle that type of water quality? These are all things that we should be thinking of, not only for today, but also for tomorrow, because the timeline of our plan is multiple decades. So it may not be an issue for the next 5 years, but it may be an issue in a couple decades. So something to think about is if you're going to list something, try and put some timing in there, and then maybe rank your risk, including timing, and then list the facilities and the operations that might be most impacted. Again, this is from an infrastructure side, because you may have the water, but maybe you can't distribute it, or you may have adapted for your demands, but what if you can't distribute it? So this is focusing on that third question about the distribution of the water. And then again, what are some mitigation actions and things that you could do today to help modify the risk that may be coming? Additionally, we were thinking it would be helpful to map out your infrastructure, but layer on all of these items that we're discussing. So here's a list right here of all of the individual items and then places you can go get information. So what we would propose is one way to address the climate change infrastructure would be to get a GIS map of your service area and layer on all these individual items. So fire, flooding, sea level, and then take a look at your service area and see if these layers are impacting your infrastructure, why or why not, and then maybe even share the map, because that's something that would be helpful, very visual, and may help you quantify, what you're expecting in your region. So with that, I am going to recommend that you put in the chat box any questions you have at this time. We will be doing questions all at once. We will be doing Kendra's presentation next, and then we will be addressing all of the energy and climate questions as needed. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Kendra's going to share hers, and she's going to go through her energy intensity overview.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
No problem.
Let me get this into presentation mode. Hi, everyone. I'm Kendra Olmos from the Center for Water Energy Efficiency at UC Davis, and I'm happy to share with you some background about energy intensity in water systems and give you some pointers for how to report this new requirement in your urban water management plan. Our center is about 10 years old, and we focus on the nexus between water and energy, primarily in water systems. And we have actually been working on different methods and calculations for calculating energy intensity in water systems for about that entire time. So first I'm going to start out with just an overview on energy intensity in case this concept is new to some folks, and then I will dive into some specifics. Let's see if it's going to let me. Here we go. Okay, so one second. Let me just rearrange some things so I can see a little better. Okay. So starting out with the water energy life cycle, or I mean, essentially this is just the water cycle, but I want to emphasize that every single process, every box represents a point where energy could be consumed in the system. It doesn't necessarily have to be. There's, it's going to be completely dependent on the type of water system that you have, and you might not have energy consumed for your source or conveyance, but they're all aspects of the life cycle that you need to look at. What DWR is looking for is just your water system, not your wastewater system. So just what's outlined here in red, not looking at the energy associated with your wastewater system or your end uses of your customers. And furthermore, we're only looking at the energy associated with your service territory. So if you're obtaining water from a service provider or wholesaler, you don't need to worry about the energy embedded in the water that's delivered. You're just looking at your service territory. Okay, and then unfortunately, I guess, there are lots of different ways of calculating energy intensity for a water system. There is no one method that has been adopted by the state or really by anybody. So there's really no consensus on how to correctly do this. So you'll see lots of different ways. We've split this up into 4 primary methods, going from easier and less data requirements to much more challenging, heavier data requirements, although the accuracy increases as you go from these easier methods, which would be regional, up to these kind of like modeling and engineering approaches, which is what our center has spent a lot of time on. Regional methods are going to be really averages and estimates for a specific region, so not necessarily super accurate if you're going to look at a specific utility. So what we're going to be looking at is calculating energy intensity for your a specific utility. So you need data that comes directly from the utility. DWR has suggestions on how to go about doing that. And so that's what we're going to go over. It's essentially a way of tabulating and summing up the energy associated with your water system. Quick overview on what is energy intensity. It is really a very simple ratio. It's the amount of energy consumed per volume of water that's delivered to a customer. It just gets complicated in what data you're using and how you go about calculating it. This sort of utility specific method is really an exercise in data gathering and tabulation. It's not a complex calculation, but it's complex to try to get all the data wrangled for developing the end metric, which is energy intensity. So DWR has suggested 3 different options for calculating your energy intensity. So one, and I would say this is probably the more complex one of the the two main methods is looking at the individual processes within the water supply system. So you're going to break your energy consumption and your water volume process into these different stages or these different processes. So they would like you to consider supply or extraction, conveyance, storage, treatment, and distribution. This is going to require more data than a simple method, which is the next one I'll explain. Just because you have to know what your individual energy consumption and water flow is for all the individual processes. The other option they give you, and they give it to you in this specific order, A, B, where B is the total utility method, and that's where you can actually just sum everything up into one big lump. So you can look at your total water production and your total energy consumption for the entire system, and just divide those two quantities. This can be the easiest method. I won't say it's super easy, but there are less data requirements. And the third method, which I'm not going to go over today because it's really focused more on wholesalers or really large utilities, is the multiple water delivery. And you'll see those tables in the DWR guidebook, but what you really want to do is decide if you're going to go with this total utility method approach or the individual processes. So I'm going to look at both of those methods now. So this is the, and can you guys see, let's see, you guys can see the full title of this, right? Or do I need to move this around? Yes, you can see it, but only if I move it up. No, you can see it? Okay, good. I have something blocking the screen. Okay, so for the water supply process approach, you're going to look at each individual process. This is the table that DWR is recommending for reporting. And you can see for each process, you're going to report a volume of water, which they're suggesting acre feet. I would probably use million gallons, because once you break up into these individual buckets, it's kind of easier to work with million gallons, but this looks like their preferred unit to use. And then, the energy consumed for that process. So the challenging part about this method is really breaking up all of the water utilities data into these different processes. So when you're looking at extraction, storage, conveyance, and distribution, you're really just looking at the water system assets that are probably going to be pumps. And then with the treatment system, of course, you're looking at the entire wastewater treatment plant. One thing I would recommend, just because it's hard to think of this in this order, conveyance actually normally goes before storage in the life cycle. So I would actually suggest like switching the storage and conveyance. Okay, so as far as the data requirements, you'll actually need flow meter data for each one of these processes. And that's, typically found in your pump flow meter. And then for the wastewater, or sorry, not wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant, you should have a flow meter going into the building. So that is, or into the treatment plant. That's the flow you want, along with like the time stamp or the time period. The energy data will need to be grabbed from the energy meter, which you're typically, the easiest way to grab that is with your energy billing data from whoever the energy provider is in your territory. The hardest thing, I think, is figuring out which energy meter corresponds to which water system asset. So which pump or which treatment plant, and also making sure that specifically for the treatment plant energy consumption or the billing data, it's separated from any sort of administrative offices or other buildings on the same property. And let's see, that's probably your biggest challenge, is just associating your energy meter billing data to which parts of these processes. So taking this approach, the supply process approach, you have to have a really good understanding of the entire water system and all of your assets and, the flow and the energy for each. One other thing to keep in mind is that the water and the energy data you're using needs to have the same time period. In this case, you're looking at an annual cycle. So that's not super challenging, but just make sure you're choosing the same exact time period when you're adding these things up. And then of course, to know that this is not going to be your main spreadsheet you use, you'll probably have another spreadsheet that breaks down, all of the components or the assets in the process for extraction and for treatment, distribution, etc. And this would be kind of your final reporting table. Let's see. So then the total utility approach, the reason why this is a little bit easier is because you can take that number that I know all of you water utilities have, the entire volume of water that's processed in a year. You can just enter that right here. You still have to figure out how to find your total energy consumed. So you're basically going to take all the energy billing data for all of your processes across the utility and add them all up, and that is what's going to be in here. But if you go through the trouble of, adding up all those individual bills, you may as well take the time to categorize them and put them in different processes if you have to kind of go through all that billing data to begin with. Let's see, and then my final slide is just kind of trying to summarize these data needs and comparing them. So here I have the water supply process and then the total utility method. And so for water, the total supply, you're going to have the volume per asset, per pump, or, volume per the entire process. And you're going to grab this from flow meters, or you can make best guesstimates or estimates. As far as like where you can get help within your utility for this, I would definitely lean on your operations division to help pull that data for you, or to help make estimates of the flow per month or per annual period. I know you guys can already handle gathering the total annual water production. And then so for energy, when you're looking at water supply process, you're going to have an actual kilowatt hour energy use per asset or process. So you're going to either have internal meter data, which some utilities have, but primarily you're going to be relying on billing data. You can also do estimates. So if you have a number of pumps in your utility, but you do not have, you're not sure what the billing, you haven't been able to match your pumps to a specific energy meter and pull up the billing data, you can calculate it if you can get some help with your operations or engineering division on the estimated hours of operation of each pump, and then some specifics about the pump, like horsepower. That might be something you can actually pawn off on your engineers or your operators to try to get help in calculating that. It's a very simple calculation if they can help in pulling up the information, and that's a good way to go. I also would recommend you figuring out who within your utility pays the energy bill. If you have not actually connected, you don't have that information yet, you would want to start getting that data from the billing department let's see. And then the trickier part, of course, is matching your energy meter with the pump or the asset, which really takes kind of a boots on the ground approach, where someone has to like go out, be physically in front of the energy meter with your bill, and match like what energy energy meter number is associated with which bill. And then you can kind of tabulate which meter is associated with which pump or other asset. That's probably the most time consuming portion. And then again, your total system energy use is going to be the sum of all those bills. And let me see if I'm forgetting anything. I will just emphasize again that this is really a data gathering and organization, almost a nightmare if you haven't started this yet. If you have started it, then it's a lot easier. I would say that I will mention though that DWR is pretty lax with how you come up with this information. If you look in the guidebook, estimates, guesstimates, plans for what you're going to do to improve on this calculation and this data gathering process for the following urban management plans, all those things seem to be allowable. So just try to get flexible and creative and do what's best for your utility depending on the time that you have to gather all this information. And with that, I'll quit talking. And I think Michelle, we're gonna move on to questions for either climate or for energy. I don't see any comments at the moment. Do you? No? Okay. So I don't know if we'll be taking comments with just writing in the chat, or there's only 20 people on the call. So I don't know if people want to, unmute and ask questions.
Yeah, well, I think it's fine. We have a small enough group to do the unmute thing, but maybe we can make it a little bit less chaotic if we do it by topic. So
Yep.
Why don't we take all of the energy questions first, because Kendra just finished, and then we'll take all the climate questions so everyone's not trying to talk over each other and we have too many people unmuting. So if you have any questions on energy for Kendra, why don't we entertain those at this time? And if we have too many people talking, then we can go back to chat, but it's also nice to hear voices and things too. So does anybody have any questions for Kendra on energy? Because she has her slides up too, so we can kind of go back to any slide if you need to. So anything?
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
This is Ginger Chen from with East Bay Mud.
Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Kendra. I have a question just for you to confirm. In the early on in your slides, I think you said that only the water system portion is what we need to report on the energy data. We don't need to report on the wastewater collection and treatment. Is that correct?
I mean, yes, that is correct. There's one more method. So there's this multiple water delivery method, and then there was some optional reporting. I don't have all these tables from the DWR guidebook inserted into this presentation. These are two, but there are a couple other tables. I believe the one that had to do with wastewater energy was optional, and it was listed as an optional table. I think it's table D. And then table C, which is for this multiple water delivery method, that one might have had wastewater in it. I don't remember. It's definitely, I don't think it was required.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Ginger. Anyone else have an energy question for Kendra?
Yes. Hi, Kendra. This is Andre Johnson. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's very, very helpful to get an overview of how we handle this new requirement. I do have one question for utilities that get the majority of their supply from a wholesaler. Do they calculate only the energy intensity within their own system, or should they be getting data from their wholesaler as well?
Nope, you do not need to get data from your wholesaler, because so within the water life cycle, your source is outside of your water. Consider this boundary right here, your water utility service area. And if your source is actually being produced outside of that boundary, then you don't need to be the one to report the energy associated with it. You only report it once it enters into your system.
Excellent. So
that is what the requirements are. It doesn't mean that's not a great thing to know, but at least what they're asking you for right now is just the energy consumed within your system.
Would you recommend, Kendra, maybe a paragraph explaining that? Just say our water is produced in, a different.
Yeah, you could explain like, because so your source column will be 0000 because you're getting it, let's say, directly from Metropolitan Water Agency, and then you're just, so your source and your extraction, you don't have that. So you could explain that in your table or somewhere in your paragraph why these values are 0. If you have any groundwater though, if you're supplementing with groundwater and you're pulling that groundwater yourself, like a lot of utilities do supplement with their own on-site groundwater, then you'll have some data in there still.
Right. And a little tip and trick, if you're going to put a 0 in a DWR table, you might want to add something in the footnote so they don't think it's a mistake. Idea. Because when you submit it to the portal, you're submitting just the tables, right? Like your plan's separate, but the tables go in. And we had a long discussion saying, hey, when we were on the guidebook committee, saying you need those comments to be in the portal too, so that you can allow people to comment out and say it's 0 because ... So it doesn't need to be a lengthy one, but then they will know it's not a mistake, and it was intentional.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
They also said you don't have to use their reporting tables either, right? You could report energy intensity in your own table that works better for you.
Right. Yeah. It becomes tricky to submit it though on the back end too.
Oh, does it?
Oh. Tables, it does. Yeah, you can do that, but then eventually you have to submit these. So then you're like, okay, well now what do I do when I get to the portal?
I see.
Well, yeah. Good question. Thanks, Andre. Anything else for Kendra?
Yes, I have a question. It's still unclear to me, this energy intensity, is that for retailer only or for wholesaler as well?
Well, are you a wholesaler?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I didn't spend time to really dive into the wholesaler requirements because I knew that most people on the call would be retailers, but there is a table just like these. I think it's table O-1C that is the suggested table for wholesalers. And it still breaks things up, but you're probably going to be focused more on the extraction, maybe some storage and some conveyance energy, and maybe some treatment if you guys do treatment. I would go ahead and pull up those tables in, I think it's Appendix O, and take a look at that. But it will be the same methods. You're still tabulating water meter data and energy meter data into these different buckets or these different processes to calculate. That helps.
So is this a mandatory or it's a recommended? It's option?
It's actually, they say it's a requirement this year.
It's now required. Yeah, I know the background on that. So in the water code, it used to say it may be included, and now it says it will be included. So that one word switching from may until will makes it now required. So it's optional. But
it's very flexible.
Yeah, it's flexible, but it is required. So
yeah, it even said you could put in guesstimates or estimates or so you could choose this approach where you're doing like the total utility, where it's just all the water processed for a year, which I'm sure you already have, and then somehow come up with an estimate for the total energy consumed. And if that energy consumed ends up including buildings or other things, just write that in your assumptions, that you weren't able to separate it, or maybe you have energy for some of the processes, but you don't have energy for the others. Yeah, which is why I personally would lean on the engineers and the operators in my utility to help me if I needed to, pull some of this data or just get their estimate. Have the engineering team do some estimates on what is the annual estimated energy consumption of all of the pumps and the water treatment processes. They should be able to give that to you. And then you might not have a super accurate energy intensity number to report, but it's going to be an engineered estimate, and that's going to be better than reporting nothing.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to water loss. The very first time we submitted the water loss workbooks, everybody was kind of like, some had it dialed in, some were like okay, and some were like clearly not accurate because the numbers coming out were a little unrealistic.
Right.
But it went from being, you know, the first year, the second year, the third year. I think this is going to have the same progression. So in 2015, both climate and energy were optional. Now they're required, but it's a little bit loose. And then I would think in 2025, they're going to maybe tighten that a little. We'll see. But I would assume it's going to be on that same progression. So this
I would imagine they're going to want to get more detailed and more accurate on this the next time that you guys are required. So it's good to start planning now for what you need to do.
Figure out where your holes are and then fill them the next 5 years. Yeah.
And just add that to your management plan. Say, look, the energy is an engineered calculation. But you know, our plans in the next 5 years are to start matching our energy meters to our water assets, so we know how to tabulate this data.
Right.
And it will be to your benefit to do that, because further down the line, and I know we're not the only entity really pushing this, but in order to get funding from the cap and trade program, the greenhouse gas revolving fund, or from energy utilities for water conservation, you're going to have to know how much energy is saved when water is saved in your utility. And if you know that, and if you're able to back it up with data, you're going to be more likely to gather funding for that sort of thing.
And point that it's required in the plan.
So but it's not a waste of time, because you're not going to end up using it. And then when you have energy, you can calculate greenhouse gas emissions,
which ties back to climate change.
Which is, we should probably do some questions on climate change. But
that's what I was just going to say. I'm like, okay, so switching gears to climate change. Thank you, Kendra.
You're
Does anybody
welcome.
have any questions on climate change?
Yes. Again, I think at the last DWI's workshop, it was suggested that we have we have a discussion of how to approach, you know, the climate change. It feels like, you know, for some of, you know, obviously the detailed calculation may not be feasible because it requires those big, you know, climate global circulating modeling, all that stuff, right? Given the time, effort, you know, the kind of scale required. So is that acceptable? You know, when we talk about demand, future supply, would that be some kind of like a descriptive, like a qualitative? Would that be sufficient?
Qualitative versus quantitative, I think is your question. So I would say it's not prescriptive. It's the first time it's been required. I would say you want some numbers in there, and that's why I put in just the temperatures, you know, so they're looking for you. And I did talk to Sabrina about this directly. I said, what are you looking for? She said, we want to know that you're considering it. So I want you to say it in 3 ways. I tried to highlight those. 1, you're taking some sort of consideration for the change in supply. 2, you're looking at it in some ways for reliability, your demands, and the shift in your profile. And that 3, you're looking at it for your infrastructure. With that being said, you can theoretically do it qualitatively in paragraphs. I would at a minimum define, you know, each of the topics. If you get to the back part of Appendix I, they have all those different areas. So if you're going to do it qualitatively, I would at least outline in your region which of these items are most impactful for you, so they can see that you'd had some thought put into, yes, we've taken a look at it. This is where we're at now. We haven't modeled it, but we're going to. The American Infrastructure Act requires climate resiliency plans. So if you've done one of those climate resiliency plans, maybe refer to it, put a link to it. If you've done modeling for groundwater, a lot of people did groundwater modeling, and there is a climate kind of element piece to that. So if you have groundwater and you've done that, you could look there. But the answer to your question is it doesn't say. There are no required tables So theoretically, no, you don't have to do any modeling. However, I would at least show some thought in those 3 areas. Again, supply, demand, and infrastructure. But after that, it's really up to you. They did specifically say the chapters they're looking at. Chapters 3, system description, 4, water use characteristics, 6, water supply characteristics, and 7, water reliability. So I would want to see climate merged in, even if it's a paragraph or a comment or something in those 4 chapters. And it specifically bullet points those out. So I would say you might be okay as long as you put something in each of those 4 chapters. Does that answer your question?
So did you just say chapter 3, 4, 6, 7?
That's it, 3, 4, 6, 7. And they are nicely bullet pointed in the guidebook. In that appendix, they like literally bullet point them out and say, we are looking for climate in these chapters. So yes, 3, 4, 6, 7.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
No problem. Any other questions on climate? I see Marty said I would add operations and maintenance. That is true. Yeah, if you're going to do a qualitative description, it's not only the impact to your infrastructure, but if you're going to do something different in your utility, or you could think about that on the adaptation side, how to reduce like greenhouse gas, or how to change your operations to compensate for the things that you think are coming, that might be helpful. Like I know Santa Barbara is looking at sea level rise, so they might change some of where their pipes are, you know, and how might that impact your operation and maintenance, you know, or your scheduling or things, you know, you would maybe want to go that far if you can. Anything else? Oh, can we get a copy of the slides? I'll repeat this. I messaged one person, but all of the presentations, all of the breakout slides, and all of the recordings from the main session and the breakout slides will all be posted. So everything, even if you couldn't go to one of the other breakouts, you'll be able to listen to them and get their materials as well. So the answer to your question is yes.
Right, and I have a lot of comments in the notes section of my presentation that I would check out just to give you guys a little bit more information.
I have a few in mind as well. Yep.
Okay.
So anything else?
If not, I think there's a couple of slides I'm supposed to show everybody.
Yes, so you're right. So wow, we're finishing pretty much right on time, around 4, so that's lovely. So there is an official survey about what you guys think. We did take that very seriously when we did 101, when we were prepping for 201. So we definitely love your feedback for this and also future sessions. So please do. There's a link here. It was put in the chat, but it's on the slide too. And then they mentioned earlier about Water Now Alliance. These are kind of some of the members, but feel free to learn more information. They're the ones that are putting these on. We're all volunteering our time to do this, by the way, just so you know, but the Water Now has been very kind to host it and organize everything and been really great. So if you're interested, you can go look for more information. Other than that, we really appreciate you coming and participating. This group was great. It was really active, like earlier with all the polls and you coming to the breakouts, asking questions. I really hope that was helpful for you. I think we actually caught up on all the chat boxes in the main session and in ours as well, which is amazing. But we hope that that means that it was clear and hopefully helpful for you. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email us, and we're happy to help you. With that, I think that's pretty much all the material we had today for you. Any other questions, or we're going to sign off and say good luck. And oh, where's it going to be posted? I saw one last question. It will be posted in an email. So if you registered, the email that you put when you registered, you will get an email. Watch for it, please. It'll go to the same place. Hopefully it won't go to your junk or anything, but take a look. That will come directly to you, and it will have a link to where everything is posted. So, all right. If there are any other questions, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and good luck on your plans. I hope this helped you with that process. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's very helpful.
You're welcome.
If we'll take questions as long as you want to ask questions of me and Sabrina. Although we're not going to stay to dinner time, but we do want to make sure we were going to go until 4 o'clock. So That's we want to make sure you have your questions answered, or we'll do follow-up questions. But I have a number of slides that kind of just ping some of the topic areas that were for this session. And we can take these kind of one time. I have an overall, there's about half dozen slides by the topic areas, which are basically the conservation, the water loss, questions about storage, example of the revenue impacts, and then we have a number of screenshots of portals kind of if you ask questions about those too. So my idea was just to show you a few of these topic slides, and then we can come back to them. So I'm going to take 5-ish minutes and go through those, and then we should have a solid Q&A. So demand management measures, I didn't walk through these in detail during the main presentation, but I have, there is in the water code the requirement to talk about metering, talk about public education and water conservation coordination and staffing, and then any other measures you do at the wholesaler level. The retailers are focused on water waste metering, covering conservation pricing and what your pricing structure looks like. Focused on real system water losses here, which is connected back to chapter 4, along with how you're doing conservation coordination and staffing. And that includes if you're partnering with other agencies, like I know the metropolitan agencies all participate, in the wholesaler program there. That's where you would have the opportunity to talk about participation in wholesaler or other partnerships with other retailers, how you staff those programs. And then we definitely advocate that you talk about incentives, rebates, other programs that you're running, including education programs for your customers, and that look ahead on future water use objectives. So I'm going to present these, and Sabrina's she's in the chat room. So if you have questions, as we move along, you're welcome to start posting questions in these topic areas too. I'm going to pause and see if we see any burning questions on demand management measures right now.
No, not that I have in the chat room, if it's the correct chat room.
Yeah,
but there are a number that are in the wrong. There are a few people that are in the wrong room.
Okay, I'll text Carolyn.
I'm still here too, Lisa.
Oh, are you? Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Helping people move along, find their right place. Okay. Yeah, the climate change and energy one, and I know that Danielle and Sarah, so Sarah's the wholesaler, and Danielle, they have a good story and ideas and things they want to talk about. There's a lot of good topics. I'm glad these are all being recorded so you can watch all of them. Okay, so water loss reports, those are tagged in chapter 4. There is a water loss audit software that needs to be completed. It also is required for the past 2 years to be validated by a third party or someone that's passed the test within your organization and reviewed the information. And you're required to attach those system audits and the water loss report for and they're also posted online on the Water WUI data portal, the Water Use Efficiency data portal. You will see those live. If you don't know who in your organization is preparing them, or you want some historical ones, I know there's been staff turnover or whatever, they're all posted online. That's where they go. You can download them in PDF, but hopefully you have all your source documents. And those would go in appendix. The statute actually called for a standard, performance standard by 2020, and then you would be documenting in the urban water management plan a performance standard that's being put together by the State Water Resource Control Board, and they have a public process that they're doing through SB 555 that we called for. Their schedule is now to adopt that by July 1st, by 2021. So you won't be talking about the performance standard per se, but you will be attaching your water system audits and talking about your loss rate, in particular your gallons per connection per day, type metrics is what they're looking for. And the water shortage revenue impacts is an area that aligns with your water shortage contingency plan in the different stages. This is, I'm giving you a sample over there on the right of what a table can look like. It basically has a profile on the left side about different water produced and losses, and that what you're gaining revenue on. And then what that would look like if you had a 10, 25, or 50%. In this case, there's a 3-stage drought plan. You would need a greater than 50% assumption to now in your drought plan. So you at least add one column. Oh, I moved ahead. I didn't intend to. And you would have a rundown of how much is potable, non-potable, different sources of supply, and tracking the revenues through. If you generated a table like this, you basically need to work with your finance team to help you complete it. You have, if you have fixed charges, most do, unless you're like fully variable, or you have the variable costs, and then with the different cutbacks. And then in the bottom, what the whole purpose of doing this is to look at what the net change in revenue would be, and then look at what your rate of revenue increase could be or should be to help make your finances whole. So that would either be coming out of your reserves, so that helps you with reserve planning, or that helps you with drought surcharge planning and considering that. So I helped with the Alliance for Water Efficiency irrigation restrictions in times of drought study, and we did a survey, a national survey, and most, actually the vast majority, more than 60%, did not have any attention to drought surcharges in their drought plans or in their finance plans. So that's an area where if you don't have a drought surcharge planned or looked at, then that's something that you should consider connected to this adoption. And those would be subject to 218. Best advice there, or best practice, would be rolled into your normal drought fee schedule updates. And so there's historical stories of people that have been out of phase on this and then needed to catch up with 218. Because of 218 notices, you would totally miss the time frame of doing a drought surcharge, really, with basically a 4-month process to implement. If you started in the spring, you'd be well into summer or fall. I think most people looked at that in the last drought here in California. But if you didn't, then now would be a good time to look at that. This is what the water use efficiency portal looks like. And there is a population tool. There's a suite of urban water management plan tools. And this is where you find your validated water loss audit reporting information as well. And if you're an ag provider, then you're on that. And you probably invest some time in this one too. But there's, you sign up for this free. There was the earlier, it's been mentioned in the main presentation. I also talked about this supply table. This is one of the most fundamental tables in your plan, along with your demand projection, to talk about. We promised to spend a little more time on this. You will take advantage of rows or multiple rows, unless you're single source supplied or just have a few supplies. You need to talk about a projection. You report actuals, but then you also need to talk and forecast what would be reasonably available in normal times and also in other tables in drought times. If you have the right or the safe yield, you'd be defining that, and you'd be putting footnotes connected to this table to assumed what. And those are the primary slides. I have the other slides with all the chapter 6 and 7 slides if anyone has questions about those, or you want to see some more of the portal. What topics, like what rolling up your sleeves, would you like to hear more about? And there were some questions about, I think, table 6.4 and the recycled water. Does anyone have any questions for Sabrina or I? You can use the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Who has any questions for us?
This is Colin. I have a question, Lisa.
Sure.
So in terms of looking at our projected demands and all of that, and we're supposed to also include our previous water shortage, I'm sorry, water loss audits. And
Mhm.
so one of our thoughts has been around assuming that our water losses will be the average of our most recent water loss audits and project that forward to build in our water losses. But I couldn't tell from the regulation if there was anything more, like it seems like it's a little quiet on how to actually use our existing water loss audits to project into the future. So just anything you might want to say about that.
In general, you know, where there isn't something prescriptive, it's kind of at the discretion of the supplier and what makes best sense for the supplier who's, you know, got to live with this plan and the projections that they come up with, you know. So if you have, you know, an average water loss that you want to use, that's fine. If you think that's going to be a reasonable understanding of the projection. If you think that you're going to be implementing programs or things like that to reduce water loss, then you might want to project that you reduce water loss, that it goes down a little bit.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
We tend to include it in the conservation section. So that's where we would write it up in the DMM section in chapter 9. And then we would talk about it in the tables under conservation. We would add footnotes, and then usually we would reduce the acre fee there with the savings estimate that we assume if we were going to reduce rail losses into the future.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. That would be our standard approach.
And, you know, in all honesty, so we have an idea of what the water board's going to do with the water loss standard. It's not quite set yet. So I think suppliers have an idea of what that standard might be that they are going to theoretically, supposedly have to sort of meet in the future. And so, you know, that might be something that informs their projected water loss in terms of, you know, whether or not they might be able to meet whatever that is.
But it does sound like the key indicator the state has settled on is gallons per connection per day. So when we talk about the fact in the DMM chapter that the standard hasn't yet been set by the state, however, here are we on this key indicator.
That would be what I think would be a really good defensible approach for the whole thing. Okay. Here's where we are, here's what we're trying to do to get better, or where we're going, you know, DMMs, or as it might be. I think that would be very defensible, even though you don't know really what's quite going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with that. And I agree with the gallons per connection per day, you know, talking about any, I would probably look if you have funded CIP projects related to water loss, you know, things you feel pretty sure of. Those are things you might feel comfortable talking about in terms of planned, you know, items. The other thing to think about with water loss is real losses. Your average years, take a look at your drought years too, because oftentimes pressures go up, so your background losses go up and your main breaks can go up in times of drought. So you might, you know, give a look at your history and think about, you know, what years you're using as a regional average and why. And when you're doing your water balance and your shortage plans section in chapter 7, you know, what that might look like with your water balances. But might be more complex than you want to do, but it's a consideration.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, good water loss question. How about anything more on water loss? I should pull the chat up. I have I'm not seeing I have the ability to look at the chat right now.
Well, I theoretically have, I think I have the chat open, the correct chat. One of the things I think I would like to, you know, this is kind of, and it's come up, this is one of the comments that have come up in the comments on the guidebook and some things like that. And just people just asking questions for help. They're emailing UWMP help. New this year is the reporting of the supplies in particular by source. And what does that mean? So before you did surface water and groundwater, and that's like a source type, but it's not a source. So the source would be state water project, contract, whatever water rights this to this particular diversion, I mean, this system, this like river. So like if you've got water rights to, for instance, a particular river, you've got a few diversions on it, you don't have to do each diversion unless there's different rights associated with it. If you've got groundwater wells, I remember that because I'm looking at this groundwater table that's sitting right up here. You got groundwater wells, you know, if they're all in the same basin, then that's one source. If they're in different basins, that would be different sources because, you know, they're different basins. So think about the sources that way, and they have to be done, the supplies and the reliability assessment, double check the reliability assessment, they have to be done by source. So it's a little bit more convoluted than it used to be.
More specific, yeah.
And teasing things out, it's going to be a little bit more challenging for some people. Some people only have one source, so life is good for them. Well, no, because variable sources are good for reliability.
Is usually a profile. Okay, really good point.
Okay, we had a question in the chat. If we don't currently pump out groundwater, but you plan to in the future, how would you report that out?
So that is a really good question. Do you want to take that question? I mean, I won't.
You can take that question if you want. You seem to have your.
So you have, let's see, I'm just looking if I have the table in, I think. When you have the forecast, looking forward, can you see this bottom table down here in table 6.9? You would, usually we start with the supply sources that you have active now and are all listed. Then you would basically append to this list, you know, and add on new sources. We usually start with the list and add them sequentially down. So if you had a source that was starting at 2030, that would be next on the list, right? As you go down the list, and then you have one in 2040 or whatever, we would just go on down the list, and it would, you fill in zeros so they know it's not blank, right? You need zeros, not blanks. So you would say 0 for 2025, 2030, 2035, say, and then a number shows up in 2040. And then the footnotes down below, you would say, we plan for groundwater in X year. And it might even be 2037. You know, you're planning, you've got, you know, a different time schedule in your CIP or something like that you're planning for, but you would put down below, you know, in your notes, what you're referencing and why. And in what year you think it's going to be triggered. And then this is a 5-year time step. So usually in the notes, we would put below, like, if it was an individual year, it's planned to be triggered.
A caveat would be if you're using it just for water shortage contingency purposes, like it's emergency supply type thing, then you wouldn't put it in here. You would put it in your supply reliability assessment stuff, your drought risk assessment, and it would come in as a supply augmentation benefit.
That's right. Yeah, so that goes in the, that would be more of these tables, like often multiple dry year, you would, this is where you talk about consistency. You would want these in sequential years and future years to show up in the out years in the drought. Like you would, sometimes you're not going to turn on like a groundwater supply. It's a blended supply. It has some water quality issues. You think volume wise, you wouldn't turn it on until year 3, and you know, it's a source that you're not expecting to tap until the out years, then it would only show up in tables like this. That's right, Sabrina. That's a really good point.
So if it's a regular supply that you're going to be developing, put it in the other tables. If it's a non-regular supply that's used in an emergency, just pop it in where it shows up, where it needs to be to deal with your drought or your water shortage.
Mm-hmm. And if it's in near term, then it goes in your drought risk profile. That's 5 year.
Yeah. So
In
like
the supply augmentation benefit section.
Yeah.
How's that? Clear? More questions? That was a good question. That's how you have to really think with timelines and sources and how the story is going to go, because it's really easy to get buried in tables, and then like you're back here thinking about, you know, dry year tables and whatever, and oh yeah, we have this groundwater source and we think it's going to turn on in X year, and then you're in the supply sources or somewhere you've missed talking about it. So that's when I talk about consistency things and like going from the tables, check from the table to the text to make sure everything is linking, and across tables things are linking up. As you walk through and you go and you do that check, you need to, like in the consistency, make sure everything carries through with what you're intending.
and one of the things I guess I kind of want to, we don't go through this like the optional planning tool table thing that have freaked a lot of people out because it's got like lots of cells and monthly columns and things like that. I just wanted to reiterate that that is just for your use to use. And it can actually be populated. I mean, if you don't have, for instance, monthly data, you could use bi-monthly data. It's fine. Or seasonal data. Or if you don't even have that and you want to use the tool, you can just put a number in that annual column and it'll be fine. It does allow you to do some iterative back and forth between your water shortage contingency plan and what you come up with your drought risk assessment, because you can say, oh, let's see, this is what I plan on doing at a level 1 shortage. And then I go through my drought risk assessment and I find out that I'm my first year of a drought, I'm going to be at a level 1 or maybe a level 2 shortage, whatever. And I take my actions then from my water shortage contingency plan and I estimate how much that's going to do to meet that gap, and it doesn't work. It's not enough. I could go back to my water shortage contingency plan and adjust those the actions that I'm going to implement so that I get to a point where I can meet my shortage, I can mitigate my shortage conditions. And you can go back and forth, you know, plugging in different numbers, trying some things out to come up with a scenario that actually works okay for you, at least the best you can. And it might mean that, yeah, you identify, I need to find something here because I'm missing it and I can't get it any other way. So, but you can also go back and forth and adjust things accordingly.
That's right. It's an optimization problem.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then use that information and fill out all this stuff. Submit it. you don't ever have to do the plan. You don't ever have to submit that information unless you do a lot of calculations with it. Then it makes a nice documentation of the details that went into all the rest of your analysis. You just print it out.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. You guys are all quiet.
Yeah, more questions? Maybe we should go to our sneak peeks of the portal stuff. People want to see more on the portal or background information? What other questions you have for us? I went pretty fast over that revenue impacts table. We talked about supply shortage, talked about DMMs, we talked about water loss. Any questions on the 3, or you want to see? I have some additional slides I'm happy to share.
Go for it. They're quiet.
Let's take a look at those. Reminder to complete your survey. Those are more questions. This was your urban water management plan tool. We have used, and you get into details and source of supply. I don't know how many of these you want to talk through, Sabrina, but these are what some of the views in the tables look like.
So this is actually a little help screen that's in the tool that helps guide you through how you can go about you know, filling out some of the information and what you do. So there's some little guidance. There's also some on some of the tables, there's some pop outs. So you can do that. But what happens is you log in, you verify, yes, that there's just like that banner that says for authorized users only. So, and then go to the next slide, if you could, Lisa, that one that you were on.
Yeah.
And you get an option to do this. Now, for most, this is right now, it's empty because we don't have any plans in our submittal thing yet. There's good old test agency there. You would add a supplier, and I think I did a little, no, I tried to, but I don't think it comes up with a window and asks for the name, and you start typing in the name of the supplier, and it'll auto-populate with selected choices of, you know, suppliers with that name or, you know, part of that name. So it'll start auto-populating a list you can select from, and that helps keep the spelling the same for everything when it goes in. So you get the same supplier. So then you can select that and go on and then start launching the UWMP tool and start filling in all the information. So I think I just picked, because I could show this one. You can, you know, go to across the top, you can see the different tabs. You can go to different parts in the plan for where your tables are. Here's one table, but if I wanted to, I could look at what all the tables are, what the list is for 7. This is the old stuff, so we haven't quite updated it with the new stuff. So there's more tables now, I think, chapter 7, but and they're different, but this is what it looked like. And you'll be able to, you can either work on the first table that comes up, or you can work on the next one or things like that. And you can go to the next slide. What else do I have in here?
We also have a question on the chat about, I had a question on the hydrology assumptions for the DRA versus the 5-year scenario and how they're different. So since we're on the drought slide, before I move off, that might be useful to help answer.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I have to go back to code. The drought risk assessment is defined as the 5 driest years, consecutive driest years. The 5 multiple dry year for water service reliability is not defined that way. So it allows a little bit more flexibility for the water service reliability assessment than it does for the drought risk assessment. That said, I think life is easier if everybody uses the same 5 years for their water service reliability, then they don't have to look at. But it might make more sense to use a different 5-year. But yeah, the drought risk assessment is defined as the 5 driest years. So you are kind of stuck with that. And I'm sorry. Because I realize that
the multiple dry year ones are, I like to think of it as more like a what if scenario design drought. You can choose basically. Many still use for some agencies, the worst case is still 76, 77, interestingly enough. Does that answer your question? You can unmute yourself if you have more questions on this, if that was clear. Okay.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, that took me a minute to find my unmute.
That's okay.
Actually, I just had one follow-up question then. If the DRA is defined as the 5 driest consecutive years, does it need to follow that hydrology exactly as it occurred in the past? And what I'm trying to get to is we've identified our 5 driest years, and we've done so by percent allocation that we would have received during that time period using the calcium modeling. And for the DRA, we were going to just list those percentages as they progressively got smaller, understanding that hydrology is, you know, obviously very difficult to predict, so that it just continued to show a worsening dry 5-year period. Does it need to follow exactly as that scenario occurred historically?
It doesn't say anything. Hang on a second, because it says drought risk assessment means a method that examines water shortage risks based on the driest 5-year historic sequence for the agency's water supply, as described in subdivision B, blah, 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 where you talk about supplies. So it's going to look at the way, I mean, again, legal interpretations at the under the supplier's legal counsel and board. It says examines water shortage risks based on. Now, it doesn't say limited to or anything like that. So it's going to be the basis from at least where I could see it being defensible that it's based on that particular hydrology, but it has been modified somewhere because of whatever, you know, conditions need to be. One of the things is what I don't really like about that particular definition is it does not necessarily reflect current situations where suppliers have developed new supplies, where they have lost old supplies, where they have changed how they, you know, what the allocations might be, you know, the changing nature of, for instance, how water may be allocated because of climate change. You know, the quote unquote worst may be worse actually in the future. It may be better in the future, depending on all sorts of things. So I think that I think it would be defensible to start there, and then if you well explain any adjustments and why it's more reasonable to use, you know, to adjust your driest 5 years. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I think the operative word is defensible. I think what you think is the most probable scenario of the 5-year sequence that's, I'd say, most representative and defensible
I mean,
would be, yeah, so I agree with you, Sabrina, that's why I've done a lot of shared vision planning in this space with drought planning, and I like to run a lot of what if scenarios. And so I like to do like design drought scenarios too, where you're testing systems against, you know, repeat 677 and 2015. Like you design droughts and then test that hydrology against your system operations and operating rules and see what shortfall you may come up with. And then that's the best way operationally to look at, could you make it, along with, you know, taking drought shortage or demand reductions into account and supply augmentation into account. I mean, you can design these droughts and do a robust analysis. I mean, this is really ask you to look at the scenario with this 5-year hydrology. Yeah, and we follow the tables. Drought risk assessment, I agree with you, is more limiting and less, I guess the word is helpful in my mind, you know, for yeah, really doing a more reasonable scenario for your agency. And I would just say that's where those notes become really important. Either you keep them in the file or you publish them. Either way, make sure you have careful notes about what you chose and why. This can be an area that if you're challenged on your urban water management plan or the shortage plan later in terms of, you know, stages and curtailments or things down the line, then you want to have why you chose the planning basis that you did.
Thank you.
Document, document, document.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The weather doesn't play the same as it did maybe during your 5 consecutive dry years either. it's expected, it's projected to be bouncier. You know, more longer term droughts, more wet times, maybe bouncing around. And so a 1970 hydrologic pattern, God for all knows, somebody might end up with a 1950 hydrologic pattern that's their worst, but it's not really applicable anymore.
Yeah, it's usually 56, 55, 56. Yeah, 76, 77, even back to 1931. When you look back at some of the historical hydrology, I've done some of these 5-year design type droughts and checked against future demands. The other part is climate change. You know, I would definitely talk about it in chapter 4 if you have considerations and things that you want to, you know, at least make note of in your 5-year hydrology, then or dry year scenario. I would put that in. Any other, you know, and, you know, the other thing that's challenging is if you're a surface water and groundwater supplied agencies, you know, the worst case scenario for groundwater is slow, long droughts. Surface water are more flash droughts where it's more extreme and shorter duration. So you have even different supplies acting differently in terms of drought response and hydrology.
And you have now Sigma coming into play that changes your groundwater availability for all practical purposes. So
that's right.
What wasn't considered that bad because you had groundwater supplies now might be worse because you have less groundwater supplies.
Constraints, that's right. Okay, really good question, good dialogue. More questions? We want to talk. So this is, feel free to put them in the chat. You're gonna mute yourself. It's fine with open question time. This is the SVX 7-7 and I'm continuing, or you want to talk about this one, Sabrina? I mean, this is probably could be some notes for some related to, this is the baseline.
Yeah, so, you know, you just re-input your baseline. So this shouldn't be any different than the same stuff that was put in your 2015 plan except for what the final, the 2020, you know, actual use is.
Actual.
But the rest of the stuff should be the same unless you are a supplier that's like had a change in your area or something along those lines. And or the weather patterns are really, really different, so it changed how things go. But you would just, you know, plug in the numbers just like last time to come up with where you're at and how close you are to target. And again, if you think you've got some situations where the water use pattern for 2020 is different because of the changing work culture, then that's something you should talk about in your plan, at least in the text. Not this table, because it's just mostly baselines and targets, but, or you might even put it in this table, you know, target was based on non-COVID situation, you know?
Right. There's a number of agencies that I know have been rebounding, you know, post-drought, and then have had double-digit shift in their water use patterns. So just due to the different water use patterns due to people working from home orders.
And theoretically, you know, the commercial side, CII side went down and the residential side went up. So maybe there's no big deal because you're just talking about a total.
That actually depends where you are, because some that are more like, well, I know for the Sacramento region, other regions that if there's more local commerce than getting use, more neighborhood, you know, type commercial uses.
Or like you mentioned, bedroom communities you mentioned earlier.
But and then the primary metro areas, then they've had a decrease. Like Sacramento, 65% of the workforce commutes in. So we don't all live here in the city. All right. This is some wholesale tables on the same of the drought. Here's the attachment for the required data worksheets. Feel free to pop in with other questions. Chat too. We'll talk
in the
through
beginning, you select whether you're doing wholesale tables or retail tables, and it automatically then follows along. And there's some cases where you can do multiple tables, especially for wholesalers. They have to do one for each one of the, and it gives you the option to do multiple tables or one table. So you can accommodate those, especially or the regional UWMPs will have to have multiple tables in some sections, and it allows for that.
Okay. How about and this is the adoption part.
Yeah, and you showed some of this stuff.
Yeah, Caroline talked about this, right, with the notices for public hearings and information. Okay. These are the water shortage contingency plan questions. I don't know if anyone had other drought related questions. The communication protocol example I had, where we're at 4:05. There's who has questions, or we can go back to asking you to fill out your survey before you leave. Please, you can actually post that in the chat.
I had a question, Lisa, regarding the water shortage contingency plan this year, asking for us to determine what percentage or actually what volume of water will be saved by each measure under each stage. And I'm struggling mightily with this to figure out what to best put in there and how to justify it. And I just don't know if there's any guidance or anything more that the guidebook is going to provide, but I'm really struggling with that piece. And I just wonder if there's any help there.
So we put some references in there with some of these things, and I don't believe it says what each specific, I have to double check. I don't think you have to do what each specific thing does, but you know, whatever you're deciding to do, all the little actions that you're deciding to do for level 1, how much do you estimate that helping? And it's so variable depending on where you are, who you are, and how you operate, that one size does not fit all. So, but what we encourage people to do is to look at what happened during the recent drought and what was done and what effect that had on water use. And then use that kind of information to justify and put in how effective you think your different actions are going to be in these different stages.
Yeah, I think, and I agree, Sabrina. I think that's a good overview. It's you can look to some resources such as remind me if your Alliance for Water Efficiency, but they do have and there is actually an executive summary too of the municipal irrigation restrictions during times of drought study that we completed last January. There's 8 case studies. Some of them, 5 of them were in California. So there's a number of insights into irrigation days and how to design irrigation days and how to make assumptions about water savings from that in that study that we found that you can look to. And I think the other is one of the main triggers to think about: how much irrigation demand do you really estimate that you have? And if you put in your drought stages, and usually one of your last drought stages, you know where's that threshold really land for you in your service area? That's one of the most important things. And some, like the city of Sacramento and Visalia, Calwater, others have put in place permanent, like 1 day a week water restrictions. If you're, or even seasonal permanent watering restrictions, then that's an adjustment to that drought tool that you had. So you need to think through what some of policies had, if you've updated AMI data and data portals and had more customer service, you know, what savings I can talk more kind of offline if you want, but you kind of think through new tools that you have. We tend to rely more on, you know, hardware and actions like turning off irrigation systems to kind of benchmark reliable things you could see. We have often found that, you know, there's a legacy 15 to 20% in systems that when you ask for the drought, you know, that there'll be a response. We're pretty last drought. There's been landscape transformation. I mean, you have to look back at some of your history and you know, make a guesstimate. In your case, you had the fires, you have new landscape going in, less irrigation demand. That really look like it's going to be very service area specific. But I can say there's some good EPA WaterSense tools on budgeting too. I don't know if you've been on the water use website. Obviously, end use studies help. And this irrigation restrictions drought study is one that I would definitely look at. Even the 11-page executive summary, I think is informative, which is public.
And I think that irrigation survey thing also talked about some of the other BMPs.
I'll definitely take a look. In my area, there's no political will to limit the number of irrigation days. So, and we tend to get a very quick response. If we ask folks to cut back, we tend to get, if we do any kind of sustained messaging, we get 15 to 20% just with the, please, could you help us?
Right.
So, you know, I guess part of this conversation has kind of helped me understand that we can use our own experience, which is great. You know, that every time we've asked for some, we've seen 15 to 20% without any prohibitions added, without, you know, anything else. And then we're also going to have, for more extreme droughts, we'll have water allotments, kind of like rationing, right? And it'll get more stringent as the cutbacks get worse. So I think that's the other piece that we can rely on, is that we'll be charging water shortage charges. So the cost of water will go up, and they'll have allotments, and there'll be penalties if they don't meet their allotments. So I think that combination, and so they're rewarded if they stay within their allotment, because their water bill will be about the same as it would have been before the drought, assuming they follow along with their allotment. And if they don't, they get penalized. So I think there's some, you know, there's like a carrot and stick embedded in that as well. So this helps. You know, I think, and I'll also look at that that study that you mentioned, and also Claire Nordley works for the same agency I do, and she put forward another study that had been done that I think will be helpful. And I'm drawing a blank on the title of that one, but she had pointed me in the direction of another AWE study that I think is related to water shortage charges and fees and enforcement. So it looks like I have enough. I was thinking the bar might be higher than this, but it sounds like if we can really honestly rely on what we've seen in the past, what we think is really practical and doable, that's terrific. That makes sense for me. I can do that.
Because it's going to be so variable from district to district. I mean, even if you see that generally you do a restricted watering day, you can save this much. In some communities, you might not get that savings because they just water twice as much on the days they can water.
Exactly.
Or in some cases, you don't get anything because they're already only watering every other day. You know, they're already efficient. So it's like too bad, you know, you didn't get what you wanted. So when you don't have anything else to use, of course, using some of these information, or if your area has been studied, of course, using that information. But so often there's so much local effect that we encourage people to use what works, what describes their system best, which is often local knowledge.
Great. That's super. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely the post evaluation, definitely understanding or estimating seasonal demand, and what you think is irrigation demand. And depending on the tools, you know, if you're not going to use irrigation watering days, then the other tool you would need is an allocation one. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because those are really your two choices. It's either, and then understanding the threshold of, if you turned off all irrigation, does that get you to the greater than 50%?
Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah, so
I think the other piece of this, though, is, you know, there's the encouragement to analyze this month by month. And so if we had a catastrophic loss of water, access to potable water, and, you know, 95% of our supply right now is from our wholesaler. So if we had a catastrophic loss of water in, say, a wet January, irrigation cutbacks aren't going to do anything. So, so then, you know, I think it's, you know, I'll have to look at carefully, like, what is our use in our wettest months, and so what would our demand be, and what would it take to cut back that demand. But it gets complicated when we look at it month by month. So I know that's the recommendation, is to analyze this month by month, but I'll just speak frankly that that's a really high bar when you have an agency that is very seasonally driven in its irrigation demands, because to try to save 50% of, you know, 45 gallons per person per day in the winter is a little different than, you know, 90 gallons per person per day in August. So, but I'm going to keep looking at the data, keep looking at things, and from that local perspective, like you recommended.
And in your case, maybe you don't want, maybe you want to look at things on a seasonal basis. You don't want to use, you want to use that planning tool, and instead of putting in every month data, you put in data every, you know, maybe twice, winter and summer, or maybe 4 times, winter, summer, fall, spring, you know, because of the seasonal thing, and you use it like that instead.
Right. Yeah, good.
okay. I still see we have quite a number of people on the line with us still. Is there more questions you have, or for Sabrina and I, or are you ready to close this out? Going once, going twice.
Colin just unmuted.
Yeah.
I was just going to say thank you. I know the series of webinars and the guide, but I just know this has been probably a tremendous amount of work from all of you behind the scenes, and it's been super helpful because the changes are so substantial this time, and this is my first round, and it's been tremendously helpful, and I just can't say how much I appreciate it. And I know, you know, just even things like this simple graphic that you have here, this is hours worth of work, just this one slide, you know, and so I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate it.
This is a nice graphic update from a plan I did that's still online for El Dorado County from 2006. So this stuff, you know, is legacy, and there is things for the complement, but we've given a lot of thought over a lot of years to the, you know, these things. And so this is just the next upgrade, I feel like, you know, with the last water code update and on this drought in particular. And so this is just your opportunity to put our best thoughts into our plans, you know, for this go around. And I like to say this is our Olympics, right? This is our chance as planners to talk about our vision, and both in times of drought, times too. So greatly appreciate Sabrina's time carving out the time to be with us for this webinar. And I can't thank everyone. There's 31 people that are still in the line. So that's why I'm asking for questions. Anyone, you know, let us know. You're welcome to also connect with Water Now Alliance. And we have a great thanks. They are free to join. A lot of elected officials, if you have elected officials with your organization that are really interested in joining or want to learn more about planning a network with other leaders, we have supported this group, this nonprofit over the years, and they have been an excellent steward of education, especially for those that are elected officials. And that's why we bring that up in this urban water management plan, as we really want more attention to urban water management plans in the future. And and they have been well used. Obviously, they've been around since 1980s. And thank you so much for your time and attention and participation with us today.
And I'd like to thank Water Now and Madaus also for putting these things on to help the suppliers comply with, the water code, because it's, torturous, and their assistance in helping reach people for, and provide them the information that they need. So I'd like to thank them because that helps us a lot. Not just you guys, it helps us too. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
we
we're part of
appreciate
the
all the
education
support.
outreach team.
Absolutely. Sorry, Lisa, spoke over you, but we appreciate everyone's support and participation. It's really very gracious of you all to put your time in.
Our pleasure. All right. Thank you very much.
I think we're set for now for our group. So feel free to put some questions in the chat as we go. But I thought we could just start by looking at an example of what all of this might look like if you're, working on a more real world time frame, if that sounds good to everyone. So just assuming, let's say you're the good city water agency, and which is, your governing board is your city council. And the city council has told you that they do want to have the adoption hearing for the urban water management plan and the water shortage contingency plan at a regularly scheduled meeting, which happens on the first Thursday of every month. So working from that guidance, what would you have to do to actually meet the July 1st deadline? So you would, in theory, issue your notice of the draft plan and open public review and comment on April 1st of 2021. And it would go to the newspaper on those 2 consecutive weeks, once a week, starting April 1, with 5 days in between. So the next one would be, April 6th. And provide the notice that the public hearing is happening. But for Good City, what they want to do is have a separate public hearing for input, and then a later adoption hearing, which is why there's the longer timeline here of April 1. And then at the same time, the draft gets posted of the 2 plans on the website. And then let's say, there's various hard copies at the library, and for folks that might not be so internet savvy. And at the same, that also setting up a process for accepting public comments in writing. So from there, a few ways to engage with these folks that are might be part of the process, and other experts, and a reason to start things earlier in April. You can work with experts on demand management measures, and put that input in a revised plan. For Good City, they've chosen to hold more than one hearing, but you could also hold a series of meetings at different times and places so that disparate groups across the community are able to participate. Some people, evenings are better for them, others afternoons. With everything being online, it might be a silver lining that people will be able to participate more. And another way of encouraging participation is including background information about what went into the various elements of the plan. For example, the methodology behind the demand forecasting, and what that analysis is used for. So looking then at potential stakeholders, just some brainstorm here, and we can talk about others that might be within your communities, but some example lists beyond the cities and counties that are listed in the water code. And then from there, the first public hearing would be May 6th, which then would result in a revised water shortage contingency plan and a revised urban water management plan. And then the final hearing would be June 3rd, which would allow you the 30 days to get it submitted on DWR's website and to the various cities, counties, and the library. One thing to know about if you were to use this timeline, if there were last minute questions or revisions that come up, and I think that in the Madhouse's experience, and Andrea might be able to speak to this as well, that can happen. So you might want to consider starting even earlier, or addressing any of those last minute things in between the two, the public hearing and the adoption hearing. So then that gets you to the July 1 deadline, and then August 1st, getting it up onto the website. And we've had a couple questions about the multiple languages piece. So the government code that governs that requirement doesn't specify, what substantial means. And it is left up to the local agency to decide if there's a substantial number of non-English speakers in the community. But one thing that might be a guide is looking to other public-facing communications that are issued by cities in your service area. Voter pamphlets, for example, have to meet the same requirement. So you might look to those to see if they include, multiple languages, or reach out to the folks that are responsible for that for some guidance on that one. And they will probably have contacts for the translators that you'll need to work with to put if it is a substantial number, into the languages that are represented in your service area. So I'll pause here for any other questions. Feel free to come off mute. Or Andrea, if you have other thoughts about the submission process. I know you've done the uploading, so if you have any insights to share with the group, that they might be interested in hearing that as well.
Sure. I'll just reiterate what you said about potentially starting a little bit early. You never know what might happen, and what things might come up. And it's always good to give yourself a little bit of extra time, just because this is a really sort of a big, important document. Changes that are made at the last minute, people are going to want to review. So we definitely tried to give ourselves a good amount of padding time, I guess, in terms of having plenty of time to submit it. Also, familiarizing yourself with the submittal process ahead of time, especially if you're submitting close to the deadline, is always a good idea. And then the last thing I would say is just make sure you get your your login and your password ahead of time as well. You can always log in and look at the process and look at what's there and what you need to submit. That's what they allowed last time too. So I think it's always good to get your password and your login early, and then check out the situation and see what you're going to need. That way you're not pressed for time, and don't, and have questions at the end with not much time to get an answer with regard to the process. But it was pretty straightforward. I just think it's always good to familiarize yourself with it. Those would be my main suggestions, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is it a different login than the last time?
That is a good question. And I don't actually know that answer because we haven't done any of that yet.
Yeah, and that's something that Sabrina would know, so we can follow up with that with her. We can find out. And I imagine if you, if we can't catch Sabrina today, then emailing that we@bwr.ca.gov, I think is what it is, that email. They can answer those types of questions. Consequences for missing the deadline. not submitting a plan, water shortage contingency plan or urban water management plan, can make your agency ineligible for state funding, grants, and loan programs. In reality, what that means, you know, if you've missed the deadline but submit something later, as Sabrina explained, really is up to the particular funding agency. So if you get it in eventually, I think there's a chance that you'll be eligible. For DWR itself, they won't, according to Sabrina, issue penalties for a late submission. But of course, you know, getting it in on time is the best option, because then you don't have to worry about that ineligibility for funding. The review process, I think it can take quite some time, because there are about 450 plans to review. I don't know off the top on a specific timeline. Andrea, do you have thoughts about that?
Sorry, I missed the very last part of what you said.
What's the turnaround time for the DWR review process of their checking for completeness?
You know, that's a good question. My recollection is that it differed. Because we did a few different UWMPs where for different clients. We did, you know, we work for other people. We weren't doing our own. And my recollection is that it was different for each person. So yeah, I don't know of I think I could answer that, but it might be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, overall, I would say the easier you make it by using the checklist as an appendix and cross-referencing this section, your sections with Appendix F, and just making it really clear for DWR about where each of your elements that are required are in the plan, so that they can go through and identify everything and fill out their own checklist. Then their review will be much faster, and you'll get your letter on a reasonable timeline. So I see a question about, can we submit a water shortage contingency plan that's not adopted? The water code does require that the water shortage contingency plans be formally adopted as a standalone plan. That said, they can be amended through a separate process. So if there are needed updates or revisions after July 1st of next year, you are able to make those changes separately without reopening the entire urban water management plan. But the one that goes in does need to be an adopted plan according to the water code. So, and Michelle, I know you had a question about timeline for meeting the July 1 deadline, but I walked through one, but if there are any other questions about that, feel free to type them in the chat. I know you're no mic this afternoon. A couple other things that I wanted to talk about with the group today for this particular breakout is looking into the implementation phase, and especially ahead of the 2025 plans, in anticipation of the water use objectives that you'll be developing as part of the 2018 legislation. So looking specifically at the financing mechanisms for demand management measures, oftentimes those programs are paid for out of annual operating dollars, which can be limiting to those programs because your annual rate revenue might not be sufficient to cover water use efficiency rebates or other incentive programs that can be helpful in capturing private property conservation and water use efficiency efforts. So the good news on that front is a recent clarification from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which is the federal agency that oversees public agency accounting, has clarified that in their guidance that public water agencies are authorized to capitalize investments in these efficiency and conservation programs. So what does that actually mean? It means that as a public agency utility, you can now access your municipal debt through revenue bonds or other debt financing mechanisms to pay for consumer rebate and incentive programs. So let's say you have an existing turf buyback, but you want to bring it to scale, and operating dollars just aren't available to fund those rebates in the way that you would need to. You can shift that program to your capital plan and finance it the same way that you would any other water infrastructure project. So there are some requirements that you need to meet to be able to do this, which most water agencies in California will meet. First, you have to be governed by a board that's empowered to set rates. So looking back to this Good City example, the city council would be that governing board. The rates will then need to be designed to recover the costs of the consumer rebate of the activity. So you just have to promise that as your rates will essentially cover the debt service for that program that you're funding. And then the rates have to be reasonably likely to cover the program. So you actually have to follow through and raise the rates as needed, which raising rates is always an issue, but by debt financing and capitalizing, you can keep rate increases lower than they normally would be if you were to just fund these types of large scale programs out of annual operating budgets. So that's a lot of accounting talk and a very short summary of this financing option to scale your efficiency programs, which is why Water Now has developed a toolkit that walks through the accounting issues that might come up if you were to take this approach, as well as some unique legal and tax questions that can be resolved, but will require some special attention. So all that information is at our toolkit website, which is here, and I can put a link in the chat as well. So another thing about this toolkit is there's a panel of experts, legal and accounting experts, who are available for some pro bono services that you can submit a question through the toolkit website and get connected with them as you're considering potentially capitalizing conservation programs. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions about that financing piece. Okay, so again, if you want to check out the toolkit, I recommend it. I'm always available to answer questions as well, or again, you can connect with one of the accounting or tax folks. Any other questions, comments about the adoption process, financing options? I want to make sure that we're making good use of your time this afternoon.
This is Andrea again. I did look into Jean's question about whether the login and password would be the same as last time around, as in 2015. And I did log in using my previous password and it opened for me, but everything's 2015 in there. And that could just be because I haven't updated anything yet. But so my 2015 password and login did work. I just don't know if there's going to be maybe a different directive for 2020. I doubt it. It looks like it would be the same thing. They just probably haven't updated what's in there, what's inside the that whole login area and upload area and stuff. So hopefully that helps. If you're new to this, then you'll have to request a login and password, which is pretty easy through the website. But if you have your previous one, it should still work. And hopefully it's the same area.
Great. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions or comments from the group, I will make one last plug for completing our survey. And we really appreciate the feedback. So if you have time to do that, it'd be really helpful to us as we consider future programs. And I can put in the chat that link, should be, yes. Again, and for those that are interested, one last reminder about joining Water Now as a member, which is no cost to sign up, and it gives you access to all of our resources and annual summits, which will be going virtual for now, but stay tuned for more information about that. But otherwise, I will again thank everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you on our next program.